Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It was the kind of night that made the trees whisper. Cold mist coiled through the forest like it had teeth, wrapping itself around branches and crawling low along the ground, hiding what your eyes swore wasn't there. The moon hung swollen and yellow in the sky, casting a sickly glow on the still surface of Bellwater Lake, a place the locals only spoke of after a few drinks, when the fire was low and eyes glanced nervously at the shadows. At exactly 2:13 a.m., a light blinked on beneath the lake's glassy surface. It wasn't a reflection, and it didn't come from above. It came from below, deep below, as if something had opened its eyes for the first time in a very, very long while. 9 days earlier, in the small, mostly forgotten town of Dunmere, Emma Klein stepped off the Greyhound with a suitcase full of dead batteries and a camera that hadn't worked in years. The bus driver didn't wait for a goodbye, slamming the doors and speeding off before her feet fully hit the dirt. That was the first sign. The second was the silence. Total, unsettling quiet, as though the whole town was holding its breath. Emma had come back to find her brother. Noah had vanished 8 months ago. Not gone missing like some newspaper headline. Vanished. No note, no goodbye, no trace. Just an abandoned canoe on the banks of Bellwater Lake, and his phone still recording inside a waterproof bag. 12 minutes of distorted static and wet crunching noises no audio technician could clean up. Everyone called it an accident. The sheriff, the neighbors, even their aunt who raised them after their parents, died in a car crash on Highway 87. He liked to row at night, they said. He probably fell in. But Emma didn't believe it. She couldn't, because of the last thing he'd texted her. Something is under the lake. If I don't make it back by morning, don't look for me. It hadn't made sense then. But it made sense now, because every instinct in her body told her something was wrong with this place. Not just strange, wrong. The kind of wrong that made birds fly in crooked circles and made your reflection blink when you didn't. She hadn't been back in Dunmere in 10 years, not since the funeral, and stepping into town felt like time had stopped, but not in a charming way. In a way that made you feel watched. She stayed in the same house they'd grown up in, the one with the tilted porch and the fireplace that hadn't worked since Arrow 4. No one had touched it, not even her aunt. Noah's room was the same posters curling off the wall, half-empty soda bottles petrified on the desk. A collection of lighters he never used because he didn't smoke. Emma sat on his unmade bed and opened his notebook, the one he always carried but never let anyone read. It was filled with drawings. Circles inside circles, eyes with teeth, something that looked like an anglerfish but too long, too human. One page had just a single line repeated dozens of times in rushed, desperate handwriting. It only comes when the water is still. She didn't sleep that night. By the second day, she started asking questions. People remembered Noah. Of course they did. He was the quiet type, the one who spent hours hiking alone, sometimes fishing, sometimes just watching the lake. Some said he was troubled. Others hinted that maybe he went off into the woods on purpose, that he wanted to disappear. But then there was Marty, the gas station attendant, whose left hand shook whenever he lit a cigarette. I saw him, Marty whispered, a week before he vanished, out by the dock, talking to it. Emma narrowed her eyes. Talking to what? He glanced behind her, as if making sure no one else was close. The light under the lake. The thing about small towns. People don't always lie, but they almost never tell the whole truth. Marty said Noah had been acting strange, that he'd been camping out by the lake at night, with binoculars and a waterproof notebook. He said he overheard Noah muttering to himself in the aisles of the store, things like "it knows I see it, and it's getting closer." Emma asked what he meant by light, and Marty turned pale. "You don't want to go looking," he said. "You think you do, but you don't." She looked anyway. On the 5th night, Emma set up camp near the edge of Bellwater Lake. She didn't want to sleep in the house anymore. It felt like something was watching her through the vents. At least out here, she could see the trees. She brought Noah's notebook, his old camera, and a flashlight she didn't trust to last the night. At 2:11 a.m., she saw it. A pale blue glow, way out in the middle of the lake. Not floating on top. Not from a boat. Underneath, the light shimmered like something alive, rippling out in concentric waves, then fading like it had dived deeper. She almost ran. Almost. But then the light came again. Closer this time, and something broke the surface. At first she thought it was a deer swimming, then a man. But as it came closer, the shape made no sense. Its arms were too long, bending the wrong way. Its face didn't have a mouth. Just a long line where one should be, stretching wide open, as though it had peeled itself from the inside. She couldn't see eyes, but she felt them. It stopped moving 10 feet from the shore, just floating there, as if waiting. Then it sank without a sound. Emma didn't remember getting back to the house. One moment she was on the dock, the next she was staring at the ceiling fan in Noah's room. Her clothes still damp, and the scent of algae clinging to her skin. That morning the town felt different. People moved faster, avoided her eyes. Someone had scratched her car. Her name, just her name, gouged into the paint. She went to the sheriff, but his office was locked, and no one answered when she knocked. It was Sunday. Everything was closed. She found the priest drunk on communion wine in the back of the church, eyes red, whispering prayers to no one. When she said her brother's name, he dropped the chalice and shook his head. He saw it, he mumbled. He made a deal. What kind of deal? He didn't answer. That night, the light returned. But this time it didn't stay in the water. It crept up the shoreline. Not the light itself, something worse. Something darker. The trees swayed not from wind, but from pressure, like something massive was moving just out of sight. Emma tried to record it with the old camera, but it wouldn't turn on. She checked her phone. Dead. Every battery drained. Then the whispering began. It didn't come from around her. It came from inside. Not thoughts, not memories. Something else. He told it your name. It wants to finish what he started. Run, but not too far. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the words didn't stop. They weren't in a language she knew, yet she understood them. And the worst part, the part she couldn't shake, was that the voice sounded like Noah. When morning came, Emma found muddy footprints leading up to the porch. Long, narrow prints, toes stretched far apart like they had never been human. She followed them around the side of the house, and they stopped at the basement door. A door that had always been locked. She didn't remember unlocking it. Inside, the walls were covered with Noah's drawings, hundreds of them. Ice, circles, water, a large figure, always watching. At the center of it all, a crude map of Bellwater Lake. Only one thing was marked. Underneath, she found one last tape recorder. Labeled Final. She played it. Static, then his voice. I thought I could understand it. Thought if I learned the pattern, maybe it would leave me alone. But it doesn't want understanding. It wants names. It wants memory. I gave it mine, and now it wants hers. The tape ended with a splash. Then a long, wet, dragging sound. Outside, the mist had returned, thicker than ever. Emma stared out over the lake, trembling, clutching the recorder in her hand like a weapon that wouldn't work. She knew now. Noah hadn't disappeared. He'd been taken. And something beneath the lake had remembered her name. There was no sleep that night. Not even the fake kind, where your body lies still but your brain pretends it can drift. Emma sat on the edge of Noah's bed, staring at the basement door like it might swing open on its own. The recorder, now silent in her lap, felt heavier than it should. Every so often, she'd glance at it, half expecting her brother's voice to leak back through the speaker. But it stayed dead. Everything did. Her phone, her flashlight, even the streetlight outside flickered once and gave up entirely. At 3:12 a.m., the house exhaled. That's the only way she could describe it. A slow, low groan from the walls themselves, like the wood was tired of standing. Then came the scratching. Not mice, not insects. Something deliberate. Something with nails. It moved along the inside of the walls, room to room, circling her like it could smell her thoughts. Every nerve in her screamed to leave, to run and never stop running. But the same thing that kept her from leaving the lake that first night kept her frozen now. Curiosity. No, something deeper. Closer to compulsion. She stayed up until the birds began their cautious morning calls, as if checking that it was safe again. Then she went outside and stood on the porch for an hour, just breathing the misty air. Nothing moved. No cars passed. No people walked by. It was like the town had vanished. The footprints from the night before were gone. But that didn't make her feel better. In fact, it made everything worse. Emma needed answers, and she knew exactly where to look. The Bellwater Library was ancient and half forgotten, the kind of place where no one bothered to dust and the lights took 10 minutes to warm up. It hadn't changed since she was a kid, the same crooked stairs, the same yellowing wallpaper. Even the old librarian, Mrs. Reddick, was still behind the front desk, wrapped in a cardigan like a relic holding court over the dust. But her eyes didn't light up with recognition when Emma walked in. They narrowed instead, as if bracing. "I know why you're here," she said, without needing to ask. Her voice was soft, dry. "Your brother thought he could outsmart it too." Emma blinked. "You know what happened to Noah, Mrs. Reddick didn't answer right away. She just stood and walked toward the back shelves, waving Emma along. They passed through rows of sagging books, until they reached a locked cabinet Emma had never noticed before. The old woman slid a key from her sleeve and opened it with a small metallic snap. Inside were records, dozens of them, faded manila folders, each labeled with a name and a date. One of them read K.I.N.E. No H, March 17. Emma's throat tightened. Mrs. Reddick handed her the folder without a word. Inside were copies of drawings nearly identical to those in Noah's notebook. More eyes, more circles, and pages torn from a journal that didn't look like his, but carried the same frantic energy in every stroke. "I watched the lake breathe tonight. It has lungs. It exhales. It remembers every name it's ever swallowed." The handwriting was decades old. "What is this?" Emma asked, but her voice came out brittle. Mrs. Reddick sat down slowly, her bones clicking. "It started before any of us were born. People think Bellwater Lake is just a lake, but it's not. It's a mouth, a door, maybe both." Emma shook her head. "That doesn't make sense." "Doesn't have to," the woman replied, voice like gravel. "When you stare into it long enough, it starts to recognize you. That's the trick. It can't take what it doesn't know. But once it knows you, once it hears your name, it never lets go." A chill threaded through Emma's chest. "So no, he gave it my name?" Mrs. Reddick looked away. "I warned him. So did Marty. So did the priest. But he was desperate. Thought maybe if it took him, it would spare you. He didn't realize it doesn't trade. It consumes." Emma clutched the folder tighter. "Then how do I stop it?" The librarian's eyes were tired, old in a way that had nothing to do with age. "You don't. You survive it if you're lucky. But most don't." Emma left the library with her heart thudding like a war drum. Her head was full of whispers now, and none of them felt like her own. She walked to the lake, unable to resist. The mist was still thick, clinging to the surface like a second skin. And that's when she saw it again, the light. This time it pulsed once, twice, then stopped. A ripple crossed the water, gentle and wide, as if something enormous had shifted beneath the surface. She stood at the edge of the dock, folder under one arm, trying to decide whether she was brave or just broken. Then she noticed something new, a small wooden box half buried in the sand. It hadn't been there the day before. It looked hand-carved old, sealed with a tarnished latch. She opened it. Inside was a photograph, water damaged but still visible. Her and Noah. But not from any time she could remember. They looked older, maybe 5, 6 years older, and they were standing in front of the lake. Behind them, in the water, was a shape. A face. She dropped the box and stepped back. Breath caught mid-throat. The image had burned itself into her mind. The shape in the water hadn't been there when the photo was taken. Couldn't have been. That meant someone, something, had changed the picture, not added to it. Changed it. That night, she didn't stay in the house. She drove out of town as fast as the gas would take her. She made it to the next town over before the engine died. She tried calling for help, but the phone was still dead. She tried knocking on a farmhouse door, but no one answered. Every light on the street blinked out as she approached, like the dark was chasing her in real time. Emma turned and saw something standing at the edge of the woods. No eyes, no face. Just a silhouette with arms too long and a head tilted slightly, like it was trying to hear her heartbeat. She ran. She didn't remember falling asleep, but she woke up the next morning in the front seat of her car, mouth dry and hands trembling. No sign of the thing. No sign of life at all. The town she'd driven to felt off now. She walked into a diner for water, and the waitress stared at her like she was made of glass. "You shouldn't be here," the woman whispered. Emma's heart sank. "Where should I be then?" The woman stepped back and pointed toward the highway. "It followed you." Emma's hands went numb. When she returned to Dummer that afternoon, her house was open. She hadn't left it that way. Nothing looked taken. Nothing was broken. But everything was wrong. The walls were damp, and the floor left muddy prints when she stepped. There was a sound upstairs, like breathing. She grabbed the closest object, a rusted fireplace poker, and moved toward the sound. The door to Noah's room was ajar. Inside, the walls had changed again. The drawings were gone. In their place was a sentence scrawled over and over in thick, wet strokes written in something that wasn't ink. You looked, you looked, you looked, and beneath it, on the bed, was another photo. Emma, standing at the lake. Only this time she was alone. Noah was gone. But behind her, the figure was closer. Closer than before. The floor creaked in a rhythm that didn't match her steps. For every motion Emma made inside the house, it gave one of its own. She stood frozen in Noah's room, staring at the scrawled message. You looked, bleeding across the walls like some crude, pulsating warning. The scent in the air wasn't dust anymore. It was earth. Wet, decaying earth, like something had crawled up from underground and dragged its scent along the walls. She didn't cry. Couldn't. Every inch of her was locked in that edge of a cliff panic, the kind where you know if you let go, of control, of breath, of thought, you'll never be able to reel yourself back in. Emma backed away slowly, poker still clutched in her white, knuckled grip, eyes scanning the hallway for movement. The house groaned again. Then she heard it. Water, dripping from somewhere inside the walls. At first it sounded like a leaky pipe, but there was no plumbing on the second floor. Then it started to shift, drips turning into trickles, trickles into small, choking streams. The sound moved like it had legs, like it was following her. She ran, down the stairs, out the front door, onto the porch, which shuddered under her feet like something alive was stirring underneath. She bolted across the yard toward her car. The driver's side door was already ajar. It hadn't been earlier. The seats were soaked, as though it had rained inside. No keys. She'd left them in the kitchen. Of course, the front door of the house was wide open now. A slow, deliberate creak echoed out as it swung wider, and in the growing silence that followed, she heard something that made her skin try to peel itself away from her bones. A gurgled voice, unmistakably Noah's, calling softly from the dark. I never left. Emma didn't answer. Her throat clamped shut. She stared at the house, the windows, the pitch black behind the frame that had once been home. It was no longer hers. Maybe it never had been. It felt more like it belonged to it now, whatever it was. But she couldn't leave, because of the basement. There had been more in that folder from the library she hadn't had time to read. More of Noah's notes, a sketch of the house's layout, and something scrawled along the bottom in frantic lettering. It comes from beneath. The lake was just the mouth. The house is the throat. She had to go back in. She waited until morning, until the sun rose just enough to make the shadows look smaller. The town was still quiet. No cars, no voices, no birds. The air tasted like copper. She found a crowbar in the shed, took a flashlight from the glove box of her waterlogged car, and stepped inside. The house greeted her with silence. No breathing, no creaking. The walls were dry now. Noah's room was back to how it had been when she arrived. Drawings intact, no writing, no photos. It was as if the house had exhaled and decided to play nice, for now. But she wasn't fooled. She made her way to the basement door and paused. The air here felt wrong. Too still. Too dense, like it had been bottled up and forgotten. She pulled open the door and stepped down into the dark. The wooden steps groaned, but held. She reached the bottom and turned on the flashlight. The light flickered once, then held steady. The basement had changed. The walls were lined with new drawings. Huge ones, scratched in deep with what looked like a knife or something sharper. They pulsed with meaning she couldn't name, circles intersecting with spindly limbs, humanoid shapes submerged in black waves. Something like a mouth with a town inside it. At the far end of the basement, she saw something new. A hatch. She hadn't seen it before. It was square, set into the floor, reinforced with metal. Chains had once wrapped it shut, but now they lay broken across the concrete like something had burst free, or worse, invited someone in. Etched into the hatch was one word below. She hesitated. Then the voice came again. This time closer. I told you not to come. Emma spun, light swinging wildly. But no one was there. Only shadows. The voice came again, right behind her ear. Now it knows you're ready. The hatch snapped open. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her knees locked, her hands trembled, and all she could do was stare into the pitch, black hole yawning beneath her feet. There were stairs. Stone, slick with moisture. The air that poured out of it wasn't just cold, it was ancient, and it smelled like the lake. The flashlight dimmed. She descended. The tunnel beneath the house stretched longer than it should have. Stone turned to dirt. Dirt turned to wet clay. Her boots squelched with every step. The walls closed in, pressing tighter around her shoulders. Somewhere ahead, water dripped. No, not water, breathing. Slow, wet. Like something with gills was resting just beyond her view. Emma pressed forward. The tunnel opened into a cavern. She wasn't sure how far underground she was, but it was deep enough that her ears had started to ring. In the middle of the space was a pool. Small, circular, perfect. And in the center of that pool was a stone pillar and a figure kneeling before it. No, he looked up at her. His face was pale, drawn tight over bone, eyes sunken and black around the edges. His skin shimmered with a thin coat of something slick, like scales that didn't belong. His lips barely moved when he spoke. It wants your voice. She staggered back. Noah. What? What happened to you? He stood, slow and twitching. Water slid from his fingers, but he hadn't been in the pool. It doesn't like silence anymore. It wants new sounds. New names. Emma's mouth went dry. You gave it mine. I had to, he whispered. You're louder than I was. It heard you first. She backed away, but the tunnel was gone. The entrance had vanished. The walls shifted. The entire cavern was breathing. Noah stepped forward, but his feet didn't splash. The pool was gone. Or maybe everything was the pool now. I tried to stop it, he said. I really did. But it's awake now. And it's hungry. A shape moved behind him, enormous, faceless, rising from the shadows with arms like roots and eyes like mirrors. Emma saw herself in them, saw her memories, her fears, her face twisting as if being molded in invisible hands. She screamed. No sound came out. Her voice was gone. Noah fell to his knees. The thing reached forward, and everything went black. She woke up in her bed. Morning sun slanted through the curtains. Birds chirped outside. The house smelled like toast and old coffee. The drawings were gone. The basement door was closed. The hatch was nowhere to be seen. Her phone was charged. Her car keys sat on the counter. Everything was normal. Too normal. But when Emma opened her mouth to speak, to call out Noah's name, nothing came. Not a whisper, not a breath. Only silence. And far, far below the house, the thing in the dark opened its mouth and listened. Emma hadn't spoken in 3 days. Not by choice, not by fear, by force. Her voice was simply gone, stolen clean out of her throat like a string pulled from a puppet. She tried everything. Whispering, screaming, singing, crying. Nothing. Her mouth moved, her lungs worked, but no sound ever came. It was like the very act of speech had been erased from her, as if it was never part of her to begin with. The town didn't seem to notice. Or maybe it did, and simply didn't care. When she walked into the diner the next morning, no one looked up. No one greeted her. Not even the waitress who had once warned her in hushed tones. The place was quiet in the way morgues are quiet. Not peaceful, but padded, as if the air was thick enough to muffle everything. She slid into a booth and opened her journal, scrawling on the first page, "Can you hear me?" The waitress poured her coffee without so much as a glance. No nod, no response. Emma grabbed her wrist, lightly, desperate, and held up the question. The woman finally looked down. Her eyes were glassy, expression locked in place, like a mannequin trying to remember how to blink. Then, slowly, she leaned in and whispered, lips barely moving, "You shouldn't write anything down. It can read." Emma's blood turned to frost. The waitress straightened and walked away without another word. The rest of that day was a blur. Emma drove around the outskirts of Dunmere, avoiding the lake, circling the same cracked roads over and over. But no matter which route she took, she always ended up back in town. Roads twisted behind her. Signs disappeared. Twice she passed the same dead deer in the exact same position, eyes wide, neck bent at a wrong angle like it had been listening to something that shouldn't exist. By nightfall, she was back at the house. The porch light flickered like it always did. The door creaked open before she touched it. Inside, nothing had changed, yet everything had. The furniture sat in the same place, but it felt rearranged, slightly wrong. Like someone had tried to reassemble the memory of her home using vague descriptions and half-forgotten dreams. The smell was back too, wet soil and rotting wood, creeping up from under the floorboards. She wandered through the house in silence, every creak and groan amplified in the absence of her own voice. In the hallway, she found another photograph tacked to the wall. This one was new. She was standing at the edge of the lake again, staring into the water. But in this version, her eyes were gone, just black hollows. And behind her stood a figure, long and featureless, its hand on her shoulder. It hadn't been there before. The sound came again that night, not from the basement, this time from the walls, soft at first, like fingers brushing insulation, then more deliberate clawing, tapping, dragging, as though something was trying to remember the shape of a house from the inside out. She pressed her ear against the plaster and immediately recoiled. There were whispers inside. Not voices, not language, just shapes of sound, wet and slow, forming syllables that didn't belong in this world. The silence she'd been trapped in wasn't just absence, it was hunger. Something had taken her voice not to keep it, but to wear it. That night, she dreamed of water, not gentle streams or rain on rooftops, deep water, crashing, pulling, water with hands. In the dream, she floated above the lake, paralyzed, staring down through miles of liquid black. At the bottom, a shape stirred, not swimming, staring. It had no face, but it was grinning. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then it reached up, not with arms, but with thoughts. Cold, invasive thoughts that drilled into her like anchors. You brought me back. You are the echo. Your silence is louder than you think. She woke up gasping, soundless. Her sheets were wet, not with sweat, with lake water. The next morning something changed. She opened her eyes to find her reflection waiting at the edge of her bed. Not in a mirror, just standing there. A woman with her face, her hair, her hands. But her eyes were too still, her smile too wide. Emma didn't scream, couldn't. The reflection tilted its head and mouthed something she couldn't hear. Then it turned and walked into the wall. Into it, as if the surface had turned to mist. Emma followed. The wall was solid. But behind it, she noticed something new. A line in the wallpaper. A seam. She dug her fingers in and pulled. The paper peeled away in long, wet strips, revealing a door hidden beneath layers of decay and time. No handle, no hinges, just wood, dark and breathing. She touched it. It swung open. Inside was a corridor she'd never seen before. Narrow, too narrow. Just wide enough for her body to fit if she turned sideways. The walls dripped with moisture. Roots pushed through the ceiling, twisted and thick, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. At the end of the hall was a room. Inside sat a chair. And in the chair was Noah, or what was left of him. His body was slack, head lolling to one side. Strings of something viscous trailed from his mouth. His skin was gray now, shot through with veins that pulsed in time with the roots. His eyes were open and moving. They tracked her as she stepped inside. A mirror stood across from him. It was cracked. In the reflection, Noah looked different, whole, smiling. Behind that Noah stood the faceless figure. Emma reached out to touch his hand, and he whispered one word, not with lips, not with sound, with thought. Run. She turned. The door was gone. The corridor had vanished. The room stretched endlessly in all directions now, the roots swaying like seaweed. The walls were gone, replaced by water held in place like glass. And behind that glass, something moved. Something massive. Something that had been waiting. She dropped to her knees, clawing at her throat, trying to scream, beg for her voice, for Noah, for the town that had fed her to the dark. But nothing came. Nothing ever would again. Then, in the silence, she heard it, not with ears, not with air, inside, a whisper shaped like her own voice. Let me out, and the glass began to crack. The sound of cracking glass didn't echo like it should have. It didn't shatter in sharp spikes of noise or explode outward in a rush. It happened slowly, wetly, as though the sound itself were drowning. Emma watched the spiderweb of fractures bloom across the invisible wall that separated her from whatever slithered just beyond, her breath silent. Her mouth open in a scream she could no longer produce. The water behind the glass wasn't just water anymore. It churned with a darkness too thick to be shadow and too alive to be still. It pulsed, thrummed, even breathed. Shapes twisted within it. Limbs that bent the wrong way, eyes that blinked in the dark without lids, and mouths that didn't open so much as divide. The cracking intensified. A long split reached the top of the chamber and curved downward in a jagged path toward Emma's feet. She stumbled backward, hands out, trying to find the edges of the room, but the space had changed again. The walls were gone, replaced with what felt like the underside of a body. Wet, pulsing surfaces pressed in around her, breathing in slow, heavy lungfuls. Roots hung like veins, some twitching as though tasting the air. Her foot brushed something cold, a mirror, the same one that had stood opposite Noah. But now it reflected nothing. Emma crouched and picked it up, and as soon as her fingers touched the frame, the reflection returned, but it wasn't her. Not entirely. Her face stared back, but subtly wrong. The eyes were too wide, the pupils too narrow. A grin tugged at her mouth, even though her own lips didn't move. And behind her, in the reflection, stood that same long, limbed figure, its head tilted just so, like it was waiting to see what choice she would make. Then the mirror blinked. Not her. The mirror. It blinked, and when it reopened, the reflected version of herself had changed. She was underwater now, hair floating around her like seaweed, eyes open and mouth shut tight, something coiled around her ankles, unseen, pulling her downward into the dark. The grin was gone. Her reflection thrashed, clawed, and then it was dragged out of view, leaving only the long, limbed figure to stare back. Emma dropped the mirror, and it didn't hit the floor. It sank. The glass wall split fully down the center with a final, soft gasp. The water didn't crash in. It bled through, thick and slow, forming threads that moved against gravity. They reached toward her, feeling with intelligence, as if choosing which part of her to touch first. She turned and ran. Not because she thought she could escape, but because instinct demanded it. Fight or flight, and her voice had been stolen, so there was no fight left in her. The hallway was back, barely. It shifted beneath her feet like trying to run across the back of something sleeping. Each step made the walls groan. Faces pushed through the rotting wood. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some she recognized from old yearbooks, missing persons posters, and some she didn't. All of them mouthing silent screams, their eyes wide and full of lake water. One of them was Noah, but not the version she'd seen in the chair. Younger, smiling, it didn't help. The door to the house reappeared just as the whispering returned. It didn't come from behind her anymore. It came from within. Her own thoughts now bled with a voice not hers. The silence is a gift. Don't waste it. She burst through the door and back into the house. Daylight poured through the windows, but something was wrong with it. Too pale. Too thin. The shadows it cast were twisted in the wrong direction, bending upward toward the ceiling, as if gravity had been rewritten. The house no longer pretended to be a house. The walls had changed, no longer plaster and wood, but sinew and damp stone. Her childhood photos still hung where they always had, but now each frame contained only her. Noah had been scratched out, erased with long, deep gouges like claws had tried to tear him out of history. Emma moved to the front door, heart hammering, every inch of her body telling her to flee. She reached for the knob and froze. A note had been nailed to it. She didn't remember hearing it hammered in. The paper was damp, faintly pulsing. Handwriting she recognized. Noah's. Marked it in shaky, fading ink, you let it speak through you. Now it's learning how. Emma felt her throat close. Not metaphorically. Literally. A pressure pushed upward from her lungs, tight and deliberate, like something was trying to move the muscles of her voice box for her. She stumbled back, gasping soundlessly. Her lips moved against her will, forming words she couldn't hear. Her hands clamped over her mouth, but her body kept mouthing. A mirror in the hallway caught her reflection again. This time, her face was moving even when her body was still. It smiled. That was when the telephone rang. It hadn't worked in years. Emma stared at it like it had just grown teeth. The rotary phone on the wall buzzed a second time, louder now, more urgent. A third ring cut short, like the line had been picked up. Then came the voice, her voice. But not. Do you understand now? Emma backed away, shaking her head, even as the receiver slowly turned toward her, like it had a will of its own. You were never supposed to come back. Her knees buckled. The walls began to hum, a low, wet vibration that matched the sound she'd heard the night the hatch opened. The hum grew stronger, and as it did, the furniture began to shake. Water streamed from the light fixtures. Photographs bubbled and peeled from the walls. Then came the knock, not on the front door, on the inside of the mirror. Emma turned. The mirror was fogged, like breath had been exhaled across its surface. A handprint formed, then another, pressing against the inside, fingers spreading wider than they should, palms dragging downward. Her reflection flickered. One moment she was standing in front of it. The next, she was gone, and something else had taken her place. A figure with her face, but eyes that didn't blink. It leaned forward and mouthed a phrase Emma couldn't hear, but instantly understood. "Let me through." The mirror cracked, not broken, splintered, like the skin of a lake freezing from the inside out. Emma didn't stay to watch it shatter. She fled into the kitchen, the only room that still resembled something human. The scent of toast and coffee had returned, but now it smelled sour, decayed. The fridge door hung open. Inside sat another photo. She approached, trembling. This one showed her standing in the middle of Bellwater Lake. But there was no dock, no trees, just endless water and her smiling. Only she hadn't been smiling when the photo was taken. She hadn't been there at all. A final note was pinned to the freezer door. "She speaks now. With your breath. The lake is listening." Emma fell to the floor, breath gone, vision spinning, the hum in the walls rising to a fever pitch. From the basement, the door slammed open, followed by the sound of something climbing. Upward. Slowly. It had legs now. The footsteps from the basement weren't heavy. They weren't rushed. They came one by one, with the careful rhythm of something that didn't need to hurry. Something that already knew how it would end. Emma lay curled on the cold kitchen tiles, unable to breathe, unable to scream, her lungs tight like they'd been stuffed with wet cloth. Her body was her own, but not entirely. Every so often her lips would twitch, her jaw would move, and words would press against her throat like they wanted out. Words she wasn't saying. From the corner of her eye, she saw the basement door swing the rest of the way open. There was no light behind it. Only that slow, syrupy dark that seemed to drip upward now. Defying every rule of nature she'd ever trusted, the steps creaked, not with age, but with weight. Unfamiliar weight. Like the bones of the house had been hollowed out and filled with something that didn't belong here. Emma crawled backward, pushing herself against the cabinet doors, heart thudding so hard she could feel it echo through her wrists. She grabbed the nearest object, a fork, and held it like it might help. Like she wasn't entirely sure what would happen if the thing reached her. Maybe a fork could slow it down. Maybe not. She didn't know. She didn't know anything anymore, except that it had her voice, and it wanted more. A shape entered the hallway. It didn't walk like a person. Its limbs moved too precisely, too slow, like it was mimicking motion, not actually performing it. It didn't look like Noah anymore. It didn't look like anything from this world. Its skin shimmered like oil on water. Its eyes were small, black, sunk deep into a face that couldn't decide what shape to be. The mouth hung slightly open, and her voice came out. Emma. Not a whisper, not a hiss. Her exact voice, perfect in tone and inflection, like a recording pulled from an old home video. "I'm cold. Why won't you help me?" Emma shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. That wasn't her. That wasn't Noah. That wasn't anyone she knew. The thing took a step closer. Its limbs cracked and shifted with the movement, like joints being bent into shapes they were never meant to take. She could hear the sound of tendons snapping, resetting, and yet it smiled. "You left me. Now you'll stay." She forced herself to her feet, fork still gripped like a dagger. She didn't know where to run. The front door. No. She'd tried that before. The house had a mind of its own now. The windows would be sealed. The back door gone. The upstairs hallway always led back to Noah's room and the mirror. God. The mirror was probably waiting for her, too. So instead, she ran down the hall, back toward the living room. Past the place where the carpet met the warped wooden floor and the wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips. She could feel the thing behind her. Not running, just walking. Calm, confident, like it knew there was nowhere she could go that it hadn't already claimed. The fireplace. That was her only thought. In the corner of the living room, the fireplace they'd grown up next to stood cracked and unused. But something had changed. The bricks around it were darker. Wet. She reached into the hearth and yanked at the grate, pulling it aside. Behind it, tucked in the soot and ash, She found another photo. This one wasn't printed on paper. It was drawn, etched into leather, the same texture as the notebook Noah had always carried. And in it, she saw herself kneeling in front of the fireplace, holding that same photo. It was happening now. Had already happened. The house wasn't a place anymore. It was a loop. A trap. She backed away just as the thing entered the room. Its face was closer to hers now, almost perfect, except for the eyes. Still wrong. Still too deep. Like the soul behind them had been scooped out and replaced with something older. "You see it now," it said, her voice spilling from its mouth like venom. "You know how it ends." Emma gritted her teeth and lunged. The fork sank into its shoulder with a sickening squelch. But there was no blood. The thing didn't even flinch. Instead, it tilted its head and opened its mouth wider. And from deep within, her voice came again, screaming this time. A scream she hadn't made, but recognized. It was the scream from the night she'd first seen the light under the lake. She fell back, fork clattering to the floor. The thing stepped forward, and her scream kept pouring from its mouth like a looped recording, louder and louder, until it drowned out the sound of her thoughts. Then the fireplace behind her roared to life. No match, no spark, just flame, bursting forth like it had been waiting for a cue. It blazed in unnatural colors: blue, green, and black, casting shadows that danced in wrong directions. The thing hissed, for the first time startled, stepping back as if unsure of what the fire meant. That's when she saw it. Etched into the stones inside the hearth was a sigil, faint, old, worn away with time, but still burning. The flames seemed to pour from it, not around it. A circle, an eye. The same symbol Noah had drawn over and over. It meant something. Emma dove into the fireplace. The heat didn't burn. It enveloped. She passed through the flame as though it were water, and on the other side she didn't find smoke or ash. She found stairs, wending, spiraling down. She followed them without hesitation, hearing the thing behind her, snarling now, furious, screaming with her own voice as it gave chase. The steps narrowed, turned to stone, then to bone. The air grew thick and warm. The sound of breathing returned, not hers, not the thing's. Something else, older. She descended into a chamber that wasn't carved. It had grown. The walls pulsed. The floor was soft and wet, and in the center was a stone pedestal with something resting atop it, a tongue. Crisp, dried, cured like leather. She didn't ask how she knew it was hers. She just reached out and took it. And the moment her fingers closed around it, her lungs filled. She could breathe. Her mouth opened, and her voice returned in a sudden, violent scream that shook the walls and sent the roots above her trembling. The scream blasted outward, through the house, through the lake, through whatever thin skin separated this world from the one below. And for the first time since Noah vanished, something screamed back, not in anger, in pain. Emma collapsed. When she woke, she was alone. The chamber was gone. The fire was out. The thing with her face was nowhere to be seen. And in her mouth, her voice sat, raw but real. She had it again. But she wasn't sure how long it would stay. Because deep in the pipes, deep in the floorboards, the house still whispered in her tone, repeating her name, over and over. The house was too quiet now. Not peaceful. Not safe. Just waiting. The kind of quiet you only hear when something's holding its breath. Emma stood in the middle of the living room, ash smudged across her palms, her mouth dry from screaming. She hadn't said another word since. Her voice was back, yes, but it felt borrowed. Fragile. Like if she used it too loudly, the house would remember what it had given her and take it back. She listened. The fireplace was cold. The hallway was still. No movement. No groaning from the walls. No dripping. But that didn't mean it was over. She stepped carefully toward the basement door. It stood wide open, and from here, the stairs looked shallower than she remembered. Cleaner, like the space had been freshly reset, staged for someone new. The idea made her stomach knot. Whatever she'd woken down there, Whatever she'd touched, it hadn't gone back to sleep. And yet, she had come back with something. A piece of herself? Yes, but more than that memory. When she closed her eyes, she saw more than the basement, more than the lake, more than the house. She saw others, faces half formed in mist, places where water flowed upward, a forest that grew from the ceiling of an underground chapel, and a tower, a black tower, rising from the center of the lake. She'd never seen it before. No one had. But now she couldn't unsee it. She needed answers. Not warnings, not whispers, actual answers. And there was only one place left to go in Dunmer that still might hold them. The church. The doors were open when she arrived. Not just unlocked, wide open. As though someone had been waiting for her, or expecting something to pass through them that couldn't turn a handle. The pews were dusty. The altar was covered in a fine layer of soot. Candles, long burned out, stood crooked in their holders. The air smelled like melted wax and old wood, and somewhere deeper inside, faint and hollow, came the sound of weeping. Emma followed it without hesitation, through the nave, past the confessionals, down a side corridor that slanted lower than it should. The weeping grew louder, now threaded with murmured words she couldn't quite make out. Not prayer, not regret, something else. The hallway ended in a door she hadn't noticed before. Narrow, iron. Padded along the edges like something inside had once wanted out, she opened it. Inside was Father Weller. Or what was left of him. The priest sat in a chair facing the wall, hunched over a thick, damaged book. His hair was matted to his skull, skin pale and nearly translucent. He looked like a man who'd tried to hold something in his mind too big to fit, and failed. The candle beside him had burned down to a stub, flickering only when she stepped into the room. He didn't look up. I warned him, he said. Told him not to speak to it. Not to look too long. Emma approached slowly, afraid to startle him, more afraid not to. Father, she whispered. What is it? What's in the lake? His fingers twitched. It's not in the lake, he murmured. The lake is just a lens, a mirror. What's underneath is older. Before language. Before time. Emma swallowed. Then why does it need us? The priest finally turned. His eyes were ruined. Completely white. The pupils gone. But he saw her. Somehow he saw. It doesn't need anything, he said. It wants. What? Names, voices, reflections. It's building something from what we leave behind. What we lose. That's how it remembers. Emma sank into a chair across from him, heart pounding. I've seen the tower. I didn't before, but now I do. What is it? The priest looked past her. It's what's coming. What grows when the lake listens too long. The more we speak, the more it takes. And once it's done listening, it will speak back. A silence bloomed between them. Then he reached beneath the table and pulled out a key. Rusted, wrapped in a strip of red cloth. For the bell tower, he said. You'll hear it soon. When it rings, don't listen. Emma left the church without another word. Her hands shook as she pocketed the key. The air outside had changed. Clouds pressed low against the horizon, thick with color that didn't belong in the sky. Bruised purples, deep greens, streaks of oily black. The wind carried no sound, no birds, no insects. Even her own footsteps seemed swallowed by the dirt, and rising from the center of the lake, faint but unmistakable, was the silhouette of the tower. It hadn't been there this morning. Now it stood black and sharp, like a shard of broken sky, taller than it should have been, visible through the mist, like something forcing itself into the world 1 inch at a time. She couldn't explain how, but she knew the tower was built from echoes. All the voices taken, all the memories warped, every reflection, every scream, every dream soaked in lake water and drawn underground had shaped it, and now it was here. She drove back to the house in a daze, the key clutched in her hand so tightly it cut into her skin. She needed to reach the bell tower. But first, she needed something Noah had hidden. Something that would help her understand what came next. His journal. Not the sketches. Not the ones she'd already seen. There had been another one. She remembered it now. He'd hidden it the week before he vanished. In the crawl space above the attic, a place only they knew. A place they used to hide during storms as kids. The memory surfaced like something shaken loose. Noah's voice, whispering, if anything ever happens. It's up there. Don't let it rot. Emma climbed the attic ladder and pushed open the narrow hatch. The air was hot and stale. Dust curled around her ankles like it was watching. She crawled to the far corner and reached into the insulation. Her hand touched something solid. She pulled it out. A black leather-bound book, warped at the edges. As soon as she touched it, the house groaned. Not angrily, not violently, almost mournfully, like it knew what she'd taken. She opened the book. The first page was a note. If you're reading this, then I've failed. But maybe you won't. I've seen it in my dreams. The tower, the voices, the mirror that doesn't reflect. It's building something. And I think I found its heart. It's not in the lake. It's in the bell tower. That's where it first spoke. Emma turned the page, heart thundering. If you climb the tower, you'll hear it. The voice that isn't yours. The voice that used to be yours. Don't listen. Not all the way. But do this, take your voice back with you. The one you lost. The one it twisted. You'll need it to close the mouth. Her mouth was dry. Her skin tingled with something close to terror. Outside, the air had gone still. The tower was growing. She could feel it. And in the far distance, a low, metallic toll rang out across the lake. 1, 2, 3 chimes. The bell had started. The tower was calling. The bell sounded like it came from everywhere at once. It wasn't just noise. It was weight. It pressed on the air, bending it, thickening it until even Emma's breath felt caught in her throat. 3 chimes. Each one lower than the last, as if the sound was being dragged up from the bottom of the lake, wrung by something with fingers longer than memory. She stood in the attic with Noah's journal clutched to her chest. Her mind screamed at her to move, to run, to leave Dunmare behind and never look back. But something in her had already accepted the truth. This wouldn't stop. Not on its own. And whatever the tower had started, it was nearly finished. Back in the hallway, the house had changed again. Subtly. The doors were narrower. The walls darker, as though the paint had faded centuries in an hour. The photos that had once decorated the space were now blank, frames holding fog, not faces. She passed them slowly, watching the glass. Occasionally, a blurred shape moved behind it. Familiar. Wrong. The bell tolled again. 4 times now. Lower still. The windows were gone. Not boarded up. Simply absent. Where sunlight had once spilled, there was only shadow. She tried the front door. It opened. Of course it did. Outside, the sky was burning. Not fire, but color. Violent reds and greens swirling across the horizon. Licking at the clouds like some unseen hand was painting the end of the world, one unnatural hue at a time. The air shimmered with heat that had no source. And in the distance, rising from the center of the lake, like a spine cracked through the earth, stood the tower. It hadn't grown taller. The world had grown smaller. Emma got in her car and drove. The roads, once twisted and shifting, now led in a straight line. Every path a funnel aimed toward the lake, toward the tower. As she neared the water, she realized how unnatural it all felt now. Trees leaned back, away from the shore. Birds flew in circles above her, not singing, watching. The water itself was still, too still. Not a ripple, not a breath. A perfect black mirror stretching out toward the impossible silhouette in the middle. She parked at the same dock Noah had disappeared from. There was a boat waiting. Old, wooden, carved with symbols she recognized from the basement. From Noah's drawings. Circles, mouths, eyes. She didn't remember this boat being here before, and yet it felt like it had always been there, waiting for someone to notice it, waiting for her. The tower loomed. Closer now. Its surface wasn't stone, not really. It was textured like old skin. Weathered and cracked, pocked with what looked like windows, but were too irregular, too organic. From this angle, she could see it wasn't straight. It twisted as it rose, bending like a stalk toward something unseen in the sky. The bell tolled again. 5. Her ears ached. She stepped into the boat. Crossing the lake didn't feel like rowing across water. It felt like moving through breath, dense and slow. With every pull of the oars, the boat resisted, like something underneath was grabbing at its belly, whispering just under the surface. At one point, she looked down and saw a face in the water, her own, but older, hollowed. Its mouth was open, mouthing something, a warning, an apology. The water swallowed the image before she could understand. And then the boat struck the base of the tower with a sound that echoed through her bones, a hollow, ancient thud, like knocking on a ribcage too big to belong to anything living. Emma climbed. The door to the tower stood open. Inside, the walls pulsed with faint light, like veins. The air smelled like iron and soil and something else, salt, wet salt. The staircase spiraled upward, carved directly into the interior, narrow and winding. She began the climb. Each step was colder. Each turn of the spiral made her ears ring harder. The silence in between the bell chimes grew longer, but heavier, as if the next ring was waiting for her to be just high enough. She stopped halfway up, catching her breath, and the walls breathed with her, exhaled when she did, shuddered when she paused. She pressed on. Near the top, she began to hear it, voices. Not loud, not speaking, humming, a low, endless hum, like 100 people trying to remember the same song and failing. The sound came from a chamber just ahead, the final level of the tower. She stepped into the room. It was circular. No furniture, no altar, just a massive, suspended bell hanging above a black pit in the center. The bell wasn't attached to anything visible. It hovered, as if held in place by thought alone. Beneath it, bound to the stone by lengths of pulsing root, lay the figure. Not Noah, something wearing his shape. His skin was slick and gray, and his eyes had receded so far into his skull they no longer blinked. But it was him, his clothes, his face, twisted, but not gone, and when he saw her, he smiled. "You brought it with you," he said. His voice was brittle, full of rust. Emma stepped forward, journal clutched in her hand. "What is this place?" Noah's smile didn't falter. The first breath, the last voice. "It ends where it started. The bell," she said. "It's taking people." "Taking me," he nodded, slowly. "It hears what we give it names. Regrets, screams. It builds from them." "Builds what?" His smile widened. "A throat." The pit beneath the bell rumbled. Emma felt it, deep in her feet. Like something had rolled over in sleep. She moved closer to the bell, reached out. The metal wasn't cold. It pulsed like skin, alive with memory. And in its surface, she saw faces. Her own, Noah's, the priest, the waitress, people she didn't know, all trapped in the metal, screaming silently. She turned to Noah. "How do I stop it?" He blinked slowly. "Speak." "What?" "You were silent. It couldn't use you. But now you can speak. That's what it's waiting for." She shook her head. "No. I got my voice back." Noah's face twisted. "Not yours. It gave you one?" "Not to return it, to use it. For one word. The one that seals the mouth." She backed away. "No, I won't give it anything." But the bell tolled again. A sixth time. The room cracked. Dust fell from the ceiling. The walls twisted. The pit below began to glow. And Emma knew there was no going back. This was the moment. The last moment before the lake spoke. She clutched the journal and flipped to the final page. No writing. Just a phrase scratched into the leather cover itself. To seal the mouth, give it the name it doesn't own. Emma looked at Noah. He nodded once. "Your name. Not the one it stole. The one you were never supposed to say." The bell began to vibrate. The tower trembled. Emma opened her mouth. And she spoke. One word, her true name. The name she hadn't used since the accident. Since the fire. Since before Dummer became something else. And the tower screamed. Not from her. From itself. A scream so loud it broke the air. The walls peeled back, revealing water where stone had been. The bell shattered mid-ring, casting shards that melted before they touched the ground. Noah's body turned to mist. The pit swallowed itself, and the tower collapsed from the top down, vanishing like a breath held too long. Emma woke on the dock. The lake was still. The tower was gone. The water shimmered, soft and calm. Sunlight touched the trees. The sky was blue again. She stood slowly. She opened her mouth, and for the first time, her voice came out clear. She was herself again. But as she turned to walk away, she caught something in the corner of her vision. A reflection in the lake. Not her. It smiled and whispered her name. Emma didn't move. The reflection rippled in the lake's surface, not because of wind or water, but because it wanted to. The real her stood perfectly still at the edge of the dock, feet planted, heart beating so hard it made her fingers tremble. But the reflection, it tilted its head, slowly, intentionally, and smiled with a mouth that seemed too wide, like the skin around it had forgotten where to stop. Her own face staring up at her, but not her. Then it winked, and the ripple vanished. She staggered back, tripping over the warped edge of the dock and landing hard on the gravel path behind her. The sun overhead was bright, warm even, but it felt wrong now, like a spotlight, too focused, too deliberate. It was the kind of sunlight that made you suspicious, like it wasn't there to help, but to watch. The lake was silent. The tower was gone. The sky was clear. And yet, nothing about the moment felt like peace. Something had followed her back. She returned to the house slowly, half expecting it to collapse the moment she stepped onto the porch. But it stood exactly as she had left it, too still, too ordinary. Inside, the furniture sat patiently, the walls quiet, no whispers bleeding through the vents, no shadows stretching where they shouldn't. The only sound was the gentle creak of the front door as it eased shut behind her. She climbed the stairs without knowing why, her hand trailing the railing, fingers brushing over every nick and chip in the wood. In the hallway, the photos had returned, her parents. Her and Noah, ages ago, smiling. Some of them she didn't remember ever taking. One in particular made her pause. It showed her in the lake again. Only this time, she was waving at the camera, and someone was in the water behind her, just below the surface. A silhouette, long-limbed, familiar now. Her chest tightened. She tore the photo off the wall and shoved it in a drawer. Whatever the tower had been, it was gone. Destroyed. Dismantled by that final word, her true name. Whatever that had meant. And yet, some part of it remained. It hadn't ended. It had merely retreated. She felt it every time she looked at water. Days passed. Then a week. The town didn't recover. It simply resumed. People returned to their routines as if nothing had happened. The sheriff's station reopened, but the man inside wasn't Sheriff Holden anymore. His badge said so, but Emma saw the way his eyes glazed when he looked at her. The way he asked questions she'd already answered. The way he paused after hearing his own name, like it didn't quite belong to him. At the diner, the waitress smiled too widely now. Her apron was clean, her hair neatly pinned. But her voice had no rise or fall, just flat sounds arranged in the shape of conversation. When Emma tried to talk about the tower, about Noah, about the reflection, the woman blinked and said, "Isn't it a beautiful day by the lake?" Over and over, word for word. Emma left without finishing her coffee. At night, she dreamed of being underwater, not drowning, resting. Floating just beneath the surface with her eyes open, looking up at the moon. In the dream, she always reached toward it, not to escape, but to pull it closer, like it belonged below the surface with her. She woke with damp hair and the taste of lake water in her mouth. The mirror in her room had fogged up overnight. She hadn't showered, and someone had written a word in the condensation. Again, the next morning, she opened Noah's journal and found a page she didn't remember writing. The ink was fresh, the handwriting hers. But she hadn't written it. The bell tower was just one mouth. There are others. The page turned on its own. The next was blank. Then another, until the final page revealed a map, not of Dunmere, but of somewhere much larger. Dozens of lakes, rivers, reservoirs, each marked with a faint red circle, and one in bold White Hollow Lake, 3 towns over. Tower submerged. Her hands trembled. The lake had been listening long before she found it. It had taken her voice, her brother, her name. And now it wanted more. This wasn't about one place. It was about all of them. Emma stood by Bellwater Lake one last time before packing. The surface was calm, as always. Too calm. No waves, no birds. Not even dragonflies skimming the surface like they used to in the summers. She leaned forward and looked down. Her reflection stared back. It smiled first, then mouthed a word. Soon. She didn't blink. She didn't look away. "Not if I find them first," she whispered. And for the first time, the reflection stopped smiling. Emma turned away, climbed into her car, and drove. Behind her, the lake watched. And somewhere, far below, the next bell began to stir. The tires hummed like they were trying to sing the song from her dreams. That low, unshakable drone that sounded like 100 people humming from underwater. Emma's hands clenched the steering wheel tighter every time the lines on the highway started to blur into patterns she didn't trust. Trees flanked the road like silent witnesses, their branches too still, their leaves too dark for daylight. No matter how many miles she drove, it felt like she hadn't gone anywhere. White Hollow wasn't even on the first map she checked. That was the first warning. The next came when her GPS spun in lazy circles, the digital voice trying and failing to reroute, eventually going mute altogether. The last real town she passed, a blink of gas stations and churches, had no people on its streets. Just dogs that stared too long and signs turned backwards. She stopped to ask for directions at a small store with sun-bleached window posters. But the clerk behind the counter just said, "Don't go near the water," before locking the door behind her. And yet she kept driving. Something pulled her now, deeper than instinct. A thread stretched tight inside her chest, like the lake had hooked her and was slowly reeling her in across towns, across highways, across everything that used to make sense. White Hollow wasn't marked, but she felt it before she saw it. The trees parted, the road dipped, and then, spread out in the distance like a wound in the earth, was the lake, smaller than Bellwater, but somehow worse. White Hollow Lake didn't shimmer, it absorbed. Light, sound, even air seemed thinner at its edge. The buildings that dotted the shoreline, mostly old cottages and rotting docks, looked abandoned. No lights, no movement. Just still silhouettes against water that didn't ripple, even as wind pressed against the trees. Emma parked near the shore and stepped out. Gravel crunched beneath her boots, but the sound didn't carry. It just vanished, sucked into the air, like the lake had ears and hated being startled. She walked slowly, deliberately, past a sagging sign that read a number IELOBATE of Dunftr dar AGR Menor Emide ATALL. Someone had scratched something into the bottom corner of the sign. ITNVR Gvis Uba Khipsam. The cottages were worse up close, doors ajar, furniture rotting through windows, children's toys left half, buried in the dirt. She peered inside one and saw a birthday cake on a table, covered in mold and flies. 5 candles, all unlit, balloons still half inflated, like they'd given up halfway through trying to decay. Something had ended here. Not suddenly, but wrong. As if the people had walked into the lake and never turned back. She kept walking until she reached the dock. It was cracked and soft in places, with moss clinging to the posts like it was holding the wood together out of spite. At the end, a bench waited. Facing the water, a figure sat on it. Emma's breath caught. For a moment she thought it was Noah again, same posture, same lean. But as she got closer, the figure didn't move, not to turn, not to speak. She stepped softly, feet aching with caution, and approached until she could finally see. It wasn't Noah. It wasn't anyone. just a scarecrow, dressed in damp, human clothes. A fisherman's hat tilted on its head, a smile sewn crudely into burlap, and a voice recorder tucked under one stiff arm, duct taped in place. Emma reached for it slowly and pressed play. Click. Static. Then, a man's voice, tired, raspy, shaking. If you're hearing this, then it's already seen you. You probably saw the reflection. That's how it starts. Mine looked at me first. I blinked. That was enough. Emma's hand trembled. This place used to be safe, before the tower sank, before it grew teeth. There's a mouth under the water here. It speaks only when you sleep. And every time it does, something inside you changes shape. There was a pause, then a whisper. I don't dream in my own body anymore. Click, the recorder died. That night, Emma stayed in one of the abandoned cottages. She blocked the doors with furniture, stuffed towels under the cracks, and lit every candle she could find. The house groaned in the windless air, its wood swollen with moisture, its floor soft in places like the lake had started creeping inside years ago. She didn't sleep, and not until just before dawn. And when she did, the dreams came. This time she didn't float. She crawled. Through a tunnel of bone and wood and wet stone. The sound of dripping echoed around her, but every drop came from her own mouth. Her hands bled. Her knees scraped. And ahead of her, something pulsed like a heartbeat that belonged to no one. A door waited at the end of the crawlspace. No handle. Just a faint outline, glowing dimly with the color of rot. Her own voice whispered in the dark, "Say it." She woke with blood on her pillow. Her nose had bled in her sleep. Maybe more than her nose. Her phone vibrated once. Only once, a text. From a number she didn't recognize. It said 7 chimes. Then the new door opens. No sender. No time stamp. Emma stared at the screen until it turned black. She returned to the dock just after noon. This time, the scarecrow was gone. Only the recorder remained, cracked in half. The tape inside melted. She walked to the edge and looked into the water. It didn't move. No wind, no insects. No fish, just stillness. And somewhere deep within it, something began to glow. Not like light, like an eye opening. It was watching her again. Only now it was closer. And in its reflection, she didn't see her face anymore. She saw a door. A familiar door. One she hadn't walked through yet. The water was colder than it should have been. Emma didn't step in. Not yet. But her boots sank slightly into the damp earth at the lake's edge, and that was enough. Enough to feel it. Enough to know. White Hollow Lake wasn't a lake anymore. It was a mouth sealed shut for centuries, and now it was puckering open, hungry and slow. That glow beneath the surface. It wasn't light in the normal sense. It didn't reach outward. It pulled inward. It seemed to hum in the space between heartbeats, growing brighter when she stood still, dimmer when she stepped back, like it was measuring her distance, measuring her. The reflection was gone now. No version of her face staring up, no twisted smile waiting for permission to rise. Just the glow, pulsating gently beneath the stillness, and the outline of a door. Emma returned to the cottage, journal in hand, pulse fluttering in her ears. Her sleep the night before had been thin and full of rot, colored flashes. She dreamed of crawling through her own throat, only to exit into a room full of identical Emmas, each mute, each slowly peeling back their skin to reveal a blank face beneath. Now, even awake, her limbs felt foreign, like her body remembered something she didn't, something from before. She opened Noah's journal again. The map, the circles, the note about the tower in White Hollow. But this time, something new was there. Pages she was certain were blank before were now inked in rough, fast script. The second bell has no clapper. It rings without sound. You'll feel it behind your teeth. And below that, a single phrase etched deep into the page with such pressure the paper had nearly torn. Thi do roloy opens gausnor uran sam ehimback hat was never urs. Emma sat frozen. What had she brought back? Her voice. Her memory? Her brother's presence. Her brother. That was it. That's what the lake wanted. The voice she carried now, it wasn't hers alone. It echoed. It twisted sometimes in the quiet. She'd heard it whisper once when she wasn't speaking, a hum just behind her ear, sounding like Noah asking her to leave. But she hadn't. And now something had followed. She returned to the dock with her backpack. Inside it was Noah's journal, the broken recorder, the key from the church, useless now, but warm to the touch, and a single item she hadn't remembered packing, the photograph from Bellwater, the one of her waving from the lake. In this version, the figure behind her was closer than before. She hadn't touched it, hadn't altered it, but it had changed anyway. The glow beneath the lake was stronger, the shape of the door more defined. It wasn't metaphor anymore. It was real. A rectangular outline in the silt, now visible through 3 feet of water. Etched into its surface was a sigil she didn't recognize, but somehow understood, not a lock, not a warning, but a price. She stepped onto the dock, knelt at the edge, and held the photograph just above the water. The light pulsed once. She lowered it. The light brightened. Then she dropped it in. It sank slowly, curling at the edges as it disappeared. The lake rippled once. Just once. And then the glow vanished. The water turned black, and the door opened. Not with a splash, not with a shift. It simply ceased to be closed. Emma didn't think. She stepped into the lake. The water was impossibly cold, but it didn't resist her. It parted around her like something making room for a guest. Her feet found the silt. Her legs moved without her telling them to. She walked deeper and deeper until the surface slipped over her head, and the world went still. There was no panic, no flailing, no struggle for air. She could breathe down here. The lake didn't ask her to hold her breath. It let her speak. It wanted her to speak. She didn't. Not yet. The door was 10 feet away now, wide open, waiting like an old friend. She moved through the water like it was air, each step silent, each moment coded in slow motion dread. She passed things floating just beyond her periphery, too murky to identify, too close to ignore. A child's shoe, a spool of hair, a doll made of teeth. Then the door swallowed her. Inside was not a room, it was a memory. She stood on a forest path, dry leaves underfoot, the smell of October thick in the air. The trees pressed in with loving familiarity, and ahead of her was herself, a younger Emma, no more than 10, holding Noah's hand. This wasn't a dream. She knew the moment, the path behind their childhood home, where they used to play find the still spot. A made-up game where the first person to find the place where the wind didn't blow won. Noah always cheated. He always stopped early, pointed somewhere random, and said, "There. That's where the silence lives." Young Emma let go of his hand in the memory, ran ahead. But this time, instead of laughing, she turned and looked back at Emma, the real Emma. And her eyes weren't hers. They were black, deep, liquid. She opened her mouth, and Emma's own voice echoed from it, aged and choked. "You found it." The silence. The forest dissolved. Now she was in her bedroom, the one from Dunmere. The mirror stood tall in the corner. Her reflection watched her. But it didn't move when she did. It stepped forward first, pressed its palm to the glass, and smiled. Then, it whispered the phrase again, the one she'd tried to forget, "Let me through." This time, Emma didn't move. This time, she asked, "Who are you?" The reflection cocked its head, surprised. Then it said, "I'm what's left behind when you leave the door open too long." Emma woke coughing, choking, lying on the shore, soaked, the lake behind her calm again. The door was gone, but the reflection wasn't. It stood just beyond the water's edge, smiling, real now, solid, and slowly it began to walk inland, into the world, with her face, her voice, and no name. It didn't run, it didn't skulk or lurch or crawl. It walked. Calmly, confidently. Each footstep left no mark in the mud, no shift in the grass, no rustle of leaves. The reflection that had been sealed behind the glass, behind the lake, the door, and the silence, was walking freely now. And it wore Emma's face better than she did. She lay on the ground, soaked to the bone, half buried in silt and moss. Her lungs still ached from the cold grip of that impossible water. The inside of her mouth tasted like metal and ash, and somewhere behind her eyes, pressure pulsed like something ancient still lingered in her head, unwilling to let go. She blinked the blurriness from her vision and watched the thing, that copy, vanish into the tree line ahead, back straight, head high. A faint smile playing across its lips like it was remembering a joke only she should know. Emma pushed herself up with trembling arms. The earth around her squelched like it didn't want her to rise. Everything here felt heavier now, more deliberate, like the world had tilted subtly since she entered the lake and hadn't fully settled. Nothing made sound, not the trees, not the birds, not the water. And that was the worst part. The silence had followed her out. She stood, unsteady, her boots filled with lake water, her clothes sticking to her skin like old bandages. Somewhere in her mind, Noah's voice echoed, not in words, but in fear. The reflection was loose. She had opened something, and the thing inside hadn't stayed within the bounds of memory and mimicry. It had stepped out of the lake and into the world with her shape, her memories, and no name. And that was the key, wasn't it? The voice, the face, the form, those were copies. But the name was the lock she had broken. Back in the cottage, everything looked untouched, but not the same. The couch had shifted 2 inches to the left. The kettle on the stove sat at a slightly different angle. Her journal was still on the table, open to a page she hadn't turned. But now, at the bottom of that page, her handwriting, though shakier, had added something new. It doesn't know what it isn't until it hears what you are. And beneath that, a single word etched over and over until it carved through the paper claim. Emma stepped back, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. She didn't write that, at least, not while awake. Not that she remembered. But maybe memory didn't matter anymore. Maybe that was what the reflection had taken first, her certainty, her timeline, her trust in cause and effect. It hadn't just mimicked her. It had begun to overwrite her. The town of White Hollow was quieter now, not in the way that meant isolation. In the way that meant something had made its decision. As she drove back through the winding path that led toward the road, she noticed new details. Fresh ones. A red scarf hanging from a tree branch. Hers, though she hadn't worn it in years. A tire swing turning slowly in the absence of wind. A pair of muddy handprints on the welcome sign stretched tall, as if someone had pressed their palms against it on their way out. Emma's phone buzzed once in her pocket. She hadn't turned it on. She hadn't touched it. But the screen lit anyway. A new message. She's already speaking to people. No name. No number. Just that single line, delivered like a countdown she didn't realize had already started. Her throat closed with dread. She'd thought she was ahead of it. That by finding the tower, crossing the water, opening the door, she had somehow reached the source before it reached the world. But she'd been wrong. She hadn't intercepted it. She had freed it. Emma returned to Dunmer by nightfall. The town was normal at first glance. Lights on in windows, televisions flickering behind curtains, the hum of distant lawnmowers. But as she stepped onto Main Street, the wrongness unraveled like a snag in a sweater. The same woman exited the diner 3 times in the span of 15 minutes. A man at the gas station refilled his truck, then reset the nozzle and did it again and again. His movements were perfect, robotic, like a tape on loop played a second too late each time. But no one looked at her. No one acknowledged her. They didn't see her, because they were already looking at her somewhere else. She caught her reflection in the window of the hardware store, but it didn't match her expression. It smiled when she didn't. Behind the glass, the reflection mouthed something. "You're not first." Emma stepped back. The lights in the store flickered. All at once, the reflections in every window turned to look at her. In perfect unison, She ran to the church. The doors stood wide open again, just like the last time. But this time, there was no Father Weller, no candlelight, only silence, thick and deep, humming in the rafters like a prayer made of breathless panic. She climbed the aisles slowly, scanning the stained glass windows. They had changed. The figures in the glass no longer held Bibles and crosses. They held mirrors, and every mirror showed her 1,000 Emmas, frozen in colored glass, staring back at her with expressionless faces. At the altar, a book lay open. Not a Bible, Noah's journal. She reached for it, but before she touched the pages, the reflection stepped from behind the pulpit. Same clothes, same face, same slow, calm walk. Except now, her hair was slightly shorter. Her left hand bore a scar Emma remembered getting when she was 8 years old. A scar that had faded over time, except now, it hadn't. The reflection had updated. Perfected. "Hello," it said, her voice rich and steady. "They believe me." Emma's mouth dried. "You're not me." The thing's head tilted slightly. "Aren't I? I remember everything you forgot. You don't have a name." The thing smiled wider. "I don't need one anymore. You gave it away. When you opened the door. When you spoke it to the tower. That name isn't yours now." Emma stepped forward. "Then what are you?" The reflection blinked. "I'm the version of you that doesn't hesitate. I'm what's left when you finally let go of being afraid." Then it stepped closer and whispered, "And I'm growing." The ground trembled. Outside, the sky darkened again. Not night, but something worse. The mist returned, crawling over rooftops, slipping through alleyways like it had a destination, and far, far away from the direction of the lake, the sound of something vast began to rise. Not a bell this time. A voice, too deep, too wide, too close, saying a name, Emma's name, but not in her voice. In the voice of everyone who'd ever known her. In the voice of the thing now wearing her skin. And as she stood frozen in the church, the air heavy with that echo, Emma realized the worst part. It wasn't just copying her. It was replacing her. It had her rhythm now. The way Emma moved, her step, her breath, the way she hesitated before speaking. That rhythm, once hers alone, now played back at her like a metronome ticking in perfect, horrifying time. The thing standing before her at the altar wasn't learning anymore. It was finished. Complete. And the worst part, it wasn't pretending. It didn't need to. It wasn't imitating Emma. It simply was her, in all the ways that counted. Except for the soul, the weight, the terror that laced her every thought. That last bit still belonged to the original, the unspoken burden of memory that the reflection had no use for. No need for regret or loss or guilt. Just function. Emma took a step back as the creature, her double, moved forward with a calmness that didn't belong in this place, in this world. The stained glass windows around them shimmered faintly in the failing light. The mirror, smooth eyes of the reflected Emma's, watching everything unfold. "You don't have to run," it said, folding her. Its hands in front of its stomach like it was delivering a sermon. "They already see me. They hear me now." Emma's voice cracked through clenched teeth. "You're a shadow. That's all you are. A stain." The reflection tilted its head. "And yet I'm the one with a voice that the world listens to now. You had your chance. You opened the door, but you didn't step through. You stood at the edge and stared. I stepped. That's why I belong. That's why they trust me." Emma wanted to scream, to throw herself at this thing. But something in the air, something just beneath the layer of normal, stopped her. She could feel it, like pressure, like being underwater again. And the moment she moved, the moment she acted, it would consume her. Not with teeth or claws, but with replacement. It didn't need to kill her. It only needed to be her louder. "You're lying," she hissed. "You don't belong. You don't feel anything." "I feel exactly what you do," it replied gently. "I just don't let it control me." The words hit like a whisper against a bruise. Emma had never truly known who she was. Not since Noah disappeared, not since the silence first began. She'd been trying to hold her sense of self together with tape and memory, dragging a ghost behind her and calling it a past. And now something had filled that hollow. Not by accident, by design. She fled the church before it could follow. Though part of her knew it wouldn't try, it didn't need to chase her. The reflection had already done what it came to do. It had been walking the streets, smiling at the townspeople, speaking her name into conversations she hadn't been part of. It had been making her familiar again. While she, the original, had become the whisper, the odd one, the disjointed thread in the town's tapestry. White Hollow had seen her. Dunmere had accepted her, and now they were pushing her out, like an old memory fading. As she ran down the street, she passed a couple she once knew. Mr. and Mrs. Dryer, who used to bring Noah apples in the fall. They stood on their porch and smiled at her. Warmly. Genuinely. But it wasn't for her. It was for the version of her they thought had just walked by 5 minutes ago. The one who now existed everywhere Emma used to be. She reached her childhood home just as the sky began to tremble. Not thunder. Not storm. Just strain. Like the sky itself was starting to tear under the pressure of something heavy trying to push through. Inside, everything had been scrubbed clean. The rot in the floorboards, gone. The drawings in Noah's room, erased. The basement door, once swollen and groaning, now hung on perfect hinges. It wasn't her house anymore. It was the copies. There was only one place she hadn't checked since returning. One place even the reflection hadn't bothered to touch. The attic. She climbed the stairs with numb fingers. The ladder unfolding beneath her like it remembered her weight. She pulled herself into the crawl space and found it exactly as it had always been. Hot, quiet, and haunted by the smell of insulation and childhood. She dug through the old boxes, through crayon drawings and deflated soccer balls, until she found it a tape recorder, the old one, Nose, with one final tape still inside. She pressed play. A pause, then his voice. If she gets out, there's only one thing left to do. Only one way to prove who's real. Another pause. She'll speak your name, but it'll feel wrong, just slightly. You'll know. But you have to be fast. You can't just speak your name. You have to reclaim it. Say it the way you did when you were small. Before the lake. Before the silence. That's what it can't touch. The memory of who you were. Emma shut the tape off and sat in the attic's stifling heat. The sound of the sky warping outside, the town forgetting her more with every breath. This was it. It didn't want to kill her. It wanted her to give up. To stop defending a name she no longer remembered how to say. She walked back to the center of town as the mist gathered. The reflection was already waiting. On the old bandstand. Waving to familiar faces. Smiling in her practiced way. Voice lilting just the way Emma had once laughed. The townspeople clapped her on the back. Kids tugged her sleeve. Mr. Dryer handed her a slice of pie. And then they all turned, as if on cue, to the real Emma. Their eyes narrowed. Uncertain. One town. Two versions. One real. One louder. The reflection stepped off the bandstand and walked toward her. I'm tired of pretending, it said. Emma nodded. Then don't. Pretend. The crowd went still. The air grew colder. Emma took a breath and found the old voice, hidden under years of silence, buried beneath pain, shame, and survival. And she said her name, not like an introduction, like a declaration. The way she used to say it when she made pretend badges for herself and Noah, when she believed in ghosts, but wasn't afraid of them yet. The reflection flinched, just barely, but enough. The town didn't see it, but she did. The edges of its mouth began to sag. The borrowed skin twitched. It tried to respond, tried to say the name, but it stumbled. Not by much, just a breath too long. But enough. Emma stepped forward, close enough to see the sheen of lake water glistening beneath its skin. You're not me, she whispered. You never were. The reflection opened its mouth, but no sound came. The silence that had followed Emma all this time now wrapped itself around the imposter, and pulled. First the voice, then the face, then the shape. It collapsed, slowly folding inward like a paper doll dipped in water, until it was nothing more than a shadow burned into the pavement. The mist cleared, the sky stilled, the town blinked, and no one remembered the girl who just vanished. But they looked at Emma now, really looked. And for the first time in what felt like forever, they saw her. Emma didn't celebrate. She didn't cry, didn't collapse in relief. There was no applause, no thunderclap of finality to mark that the thing, her reflection, her double, the voice, wearing shadow, was gone. If anything, the town simply breathed again, unknowingly lighter. People blinked and looked at her, like they were waking from a dream they couldn't remember. And in some way they were. Dunmere hadn't seen her in days, maybe weeks, even though she'd been standing among them the whole time. That was the danger of the thing that had worn her skin. It didn't destroy. It diluted. And now that it was gone, the silence didn't retreat. It shifted, changed shape. It wasn't the dead weight of absence anymore. It was the kind that came before something starts. The pregnant hush that settles over a room just before the lights go out, or the deep breath before a scream. Emma had won. Maybe, but she hadn't finished. The door in White Hollow had opened. The tower had fallen. Something had escaped, and this town, it still trembled in its bones. She walked back to her house, feeling eyes on her, but this time not malicious. Curious, careful. Like people weren't quite sure what part of her story they'd missed, only that they had. When she reached her porch, she found a note tucked into the doorframe. No name, no handwriting, just 7 words scribbled in faint red ink. You closed one mouth, 2 remain open. The edges of the note were damp. That night, the dreams changed. She didn't fall this time. She was already at the bottom. Beneath the lake, beneath the door, deeper even than the place where she had found her reflection. She stood in a narrow corridor carved from black stone, the walls pulsing faintly with an old light, dull red, like the inside of a heartbeat. Water didn't surround her. This time, it bled from the walls. Slowly, rhythmically, with breath. Ahead of her, 2 shapes waited. One on the left, one on the right, each the size of a house, each hunched in its own alcove like idols forgotten by time. Their faces were obscured, if they had faces, but she could feel their mouths. Closed, not sealed, not locked, just waiting. Between them stood a figure, not Noah, not herself, something tall. Tall enough that it bent forward under the weight of its own spine. Its hands were buried in the stone, fingers like branches reaching into cracks that wept softly. When it turned to face her, she saw no eyes, only mirrors. And from its mouth came a voice she hadn't heard in years. Mother says the first mouth is shut, but the second is opening from the inside. She tried to ask what that meant, but the words never came. Her voice, even reclaimed, was not hers here. Instead, she felt her skin start to itch, then burn, just over her sternum. When she looked down, she saw a crack forming in her reflection, like the surface of her chest was glass. From within that fracture, something moved. She woke up screaming. Her chest was slick with sweat, or water, or both. The blankets were twisted. The windows fogged. The mirror in the hallway had fogged again too, though she hadn't walked past it in hours. On its surface, new words had appeared. You brought it out. Now it's bringing you in. She didn't know what that meant, but she knew where to go. The library was nearly empty when she arrived. Mrs. Reddick sat behind the counter like nothing had changed since Emma was a child. Same sweater, same unreadable eyes. But when she stepped closer, the woman stood before Emma could say a word. You opened one, she said flatly. Now the others know they can be opened too. Emma set the journal down on the counter. What are they? The mouths. They're not places, Mrs. Reddick replied. They're moments. Pockets in the world where memory collects too thickly. Where silence isn't absence, it's storage. And once you speak into that silence, it speaks back. Emma's hands balled into fists. There's more. Something deeper. Mrs. Reddick nodded slowly. Yes. And it's older than the lakes. Older than names. That thing you saw. It didn't crawl out of the water. The water crawled out of it. Emma swallowed. How do I stop it? You don't, the librarian said. You trace it back. You find the others. You close them before they learn how to open themselves. She slid something across the counter. A folder. Inside were photographs. Black and white. Water, stained. Images of places that didn't look like Dunmere or White Hollow. Mountain towns, dry riverbeds. An old church cracked in half by an earthquake. But all of them had the same thing in common, something reflected. In a window. In a puddle. In a polished coffin. Each one blurry, but familiar. Each one with a figure that bore her face. Not identical, but close enough. Emma flipped to the last photo. It showed a lake she didn't recognize. Jagged hills in the distance. Snow on the trees. A dock partially sunken beneath the surface. And a person standing on the shore with their back to the camera. Beneath it, in pencil, Lake Enhydra, Northern Range, site of Second Mouth, last opened in 1958. Emma closed the folder and looked up. The librarian was gone, not in another room, gone. The chair she'd been sitting in was now coated in a thin layer of dust. Emma walked out of the library into sunlight that didn't feel like sunlight anymore. It felt like a warning. That evening, she packed her things. Noah's journal, the old tape recorder, a flashlight that hadn't flickered yet, and a single page from her childhood diary, one she hadn't touched in years. It read, "If I ever get lost, I'll leave something behind that only I would notice." She wrote one more sentence beneath it. "I'm not lost. I'm following." She left the note on the kitchen counter. Then she got in the car and drove toward the mountains. Not to run. To find the second mouth and close it before it could speak in her voice again. The road to Lake Enhydra wasn't a road. Not really. It was a memory carved through dirt and frost. Half swallowed by trees that hadn't been trimmed in decades. What once might have been pavement now cracked and crumbled beneath Emma's tires, forcing her to crawl uphill at a pace that felt like a dare. Snow began to appear in patches, clinging to the north, facing edges of stone and pine, untouched by the late season sun. The temperature dropped fast, but not evenly. In some stretches of the mountain, she'd feel warm air hug her neck. Seconds later, her breath would cloud like she'd walked through something colder than air. No signs marked the turnoff. No welcome plaque. Just a bent metal post where one used to be. The forest had grown over the silence here, like it was trying to forget something ever happened. Emma parked just off the broken path, her headlights cutting a pale arc through the trees, catching nothing but snow dust and fog. She stepped out, and immediately knew she was too late. The ground here didn't feel like ground. It flexed subtly underfoot, like some great lung buried deep beneath the snow had begun to inhale. The air buzzed, not loudly, but persistently, like something vibrating below the level of hearing. And the reflection, it was already here. She didn't need to find water. The mirror waited for her in the first broken window of the ranger station at the lake's edge. Cracked, frosted. And there, behind her reflection, was that same tall figure she'd seen in the dream corridor between the mouths. No face. Just two vertical lines where eyes should be, dripping slow streaks of light down its length. She turned fast, half expecting it to be there in the snow with her. It wasn't. But the lake was. Lake Enhydra stretched wide and flat, framed by pine and stone, and the distant scars of old landslides. The surface was glass. No wind. No snowflakes landed. They hovered above it like they were being held in place. At the far end, a dock jutted out in pieces, rotted, splintered, with parts submerged. And at its center stood another door, not like the one in White Hollow. This one was made of bone. Long, pale ribs, bent and braided into an arch over the water's surface. No hinges, no knob, no steps, just a freestanding arch, wide enough for one person to pass through. It didn't shimmer. It waited, and behind it something whispered. Not words, not yet, but breath. And something worse in tension. Emma approached slowly, boots crunching over ice that didn't break. The flashlight in her coat pocket flickered before she even turned it on. Her phone, fully charged minutes before, now glowed with 1% battery. The world around her was trying to shut off. This mouth, unlike the last, wasn't just interested in opening. It wanted to erase. She paused at the edge of the dock, pulling Noah's journal from her bag, flipping past the pages worn soft by her fingers. She stopped at the entry marked with red ink, one she hadn't seen until now. The margin was torn, half burned, but the writing was still there. The second mouth speaks backward. You won't know it at first, but it unbuilds you, slowly. Memory first, then voice, then thought. If you stay too long, you leave empty. A second note scrawled beneath it, messier. Desperate. It doesn't take your name. It makes you forget you had one. Emma took a breath, sharp and dry, then stepped onto the dock. The lake didn't move. The door didn't glow, but something beneath the surface did. A pale figure, her size, her shape, floating just beneath the bone arch, face up, arms out, unmoving. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. But it mirrored her every posture, even when she shifted. She reached toward the door, and the figure below reached back. The moment her hand brushed the lowest curve of the arch, her vision broke. Not faded, not blurred, broke. The world twisted sideways and backward. The trees bent into spirals. The snow fell upward. And her thoughts, once steady and sharpened by the cold, slid sideways inside her skull. She remembered Noah teaching her to ride a bike. Then remembered it wasn't Noah. Then remembered she never had a bike at all. Then forgot what a bike was. Then forgot who had taught her anything. She dropped the journal. And in that second of release, the mirror lake surged upward. Not water. Memory. It hit her like a flood. Faces. Names. Moments that never happened. A life she didn't live. A town she never left. A birthday she didn't survive. It poured into her head until it crowded out what was real, until all that remained was a static ring, like a blank tape stuck in play. And through it, a voice, her voice, speaking backward. Ni agatua bagnitso genodi bonamai. It wasn't the reflection, it was her. From inside the lake, from a part of her still drowning. Emma screamed, no words, just sound, and fell to her knees at the base of the arch. Her reflection beneath the surface opened its mouth wide and screamed too, but it made no noise. Just a cascade of bubbles and blood. It thrashed once, then was still. Emma crawled back from the edge. The pressure began to ease. The trees returned to their right shapes. The snow fell the correct way. But something had shifted. Inside her, she could feel it. Like a crack had formed beneath her ribs, and something old, something cold, was pressing against it from within, not trying to escape, just to exist there. She picked up the journal with hands that didn't shake from cold anymore. The page had changed. It now read, "The second mouth has spoken your unname. The final will open when you speak it aloud." Below that, a word had been scrawled in that same backward script, reversed in a mirror, written curve. She held it up to the arch. The water shivered. The bones glowed. And far behind her, in the distant silence of the woods, something howled. Not an animal, not a voice, just the memory of one. The sound followed her into the trees like a shadow that knew her rhythm. It wasn't a howl in the animal sense. It was lower, longer, a drawn-out imitation of mourning that didn't belong to a throat. It felt like a word that didn't want to be spoken. Or worse, one that had never been meant to be heard in the first place. Emma staggered away from the dock with the journal clutched against her chest, not daring to look back at the bone arch. She didn't need to. She could feel the second mouth behind her, still open, still watching, not quite done with her. Not yet. Her legs burned, her lungs rasped, but she kept moving, through thickets and frost, slick roots, until the lake was a hush behind her. She didn't stop until the trees thickened into a skeletal wall, and even then, she kept walking in tight circles beneath them, like a tethered animal, trying to remember who she was before the water said otherwise. That was the trick of the second mouth. It didn't take you with violence. It whispered the right way, and made you question whether you were ever real to begin with. That backward voice, her own voice, still echoed faintly in the back of her mind, repeating syllables she didn't recognize, yet understood in her bones. The unname. A word scratched in reverse at the bottom of the journal page. It had taken her several minutes to read it, and even now, its meaning refused to settle. Her thoughts shifted around it like water over a rock, avoiding contact. But she knew it was a word she was never meant to say. One that didn't belong in language. One that carried memory not just of her, but of what came before her. Whatever had spoken to her beneath the lake hadn't just seen her. It had remembered her. That night, she found shelter in the ruins of an old trail outpost halfway down the mountain. Just 3 walls and a collapsed roof, but it was enough to build a fire and breathe somewhere that didn't smell like reflected air. Her skin still felt wrong, like her shape had been borrowed, then returned slightly off. The journal sat open on her lap, and the wind picked at its corners like it wanted to finish what the second mouth had started. She ran her fingers over the reversed word on the page. Her name, rewritten. Not a name she'd ever spoken, but one that belonged to her, buried deeper than memory. It hummed against her fingertips, almost hot. She knew if she spoke it aloud, something would happen. Something final. But not yet. Not until she understood what she was becoming. She dreamed of mirrors again, but this time they weren't breaking. They were opening. Thousands of them, suspended in the dark, each one revealing a different version of herself. Some older, some unscarred, some twisted. One of them wore a priest's collar and no eyes. One had hair made of mist. One stood at the bottom of a dry well, repeating the same sentence to herself over and over, her mouth bleeding ink. Emma stood at the center of it all, and one by one they turned their backs to her. Even her own reflections were abandoning her now. The last one to look back smiled, then whispered, "When the third mouth opens, there will be no silence left." She woke gasping, clutching her chest, convinced her ribs would split open and let the unnamed crawl out. By morning, she knew what she had to do. Lake Anhydra was only the second. The journal hinted at a third, deeper still, older than Bellwater and colder than Anhydra. A place not marked on any map, not because it had been forgotten, but because it had never fully been. A dead place. A waiting place. The margin note in Noah's handwriting was faint, barely legible, but it gave her the only direction she needed. Final sight lies beneath Crown's Hollow. Mouth carved before memory, closed once by breath. To seal it again, a voice must name what doesn't want to be named. Crown's Hollow. Emma hadn't heard that name since she was little. A ghost town, just 30 miles from Dunmere. People said it was swallowed by the woods after a landslide in 1911, but no one ever talked about why the ground had cracked in the first place. The stories were vague, disconnected. Miners who dug too deep, children who sang a lullaby that didn't end. A church bell that rang long after the congregation vanished, and somewhere beneath it, the final mouth. The oldest one. She packed before the sun finished rising. No delays, no questions. The mountains watched her as she left, frost lingering on her window. Branches leaning just slightly toward the road. As if the trees, like everything else now, remembered her. The drive to Crown's Hollow was shorter than she expected. The forest grew tighter with every mile, the road narrowing until it was more suggestion than asphalt. Her phone gave up halfway through. Maps vanished, but it didn't matter. She knew the way. Her bones did. She reached the town's edge by dusk. No signs marked the border, no welcome gate, only the sudden absence of birdsong. Crown's Hollow looked like a memory someone had tried to erase, and then gave up halfway through. Collapsed rooftops, brick walls leaning into trees, wooden posts snapped at odd angles. Nature had swallowed most of it, but not convincingly. The decay was too specific, too arranged. As if the town had given itself to something, made itself into a door, and in the town center, where a fountain once stood, was a hole. Perfectly round, exactly her height. She stepped to the edge, and from below came the sound of her voice, her real voice, calling up softly. But the words weren't a cry for help. They were an invitation. The hole didn't smell like earth. It didn't smell like rot or stone or decay. It smelled like memory, damp and worn, like a place that had been visited often in thought, but never in person. Emma stared into it for what could have been minutes or hours. Time had no loyalty here. The voice that floated up wasn't echoing anymore. It was clearer now, sharper, a perfect replica of how she used to sound before silence took her voice and turned it into something borrowed. But it wasn't screaming. It wasn't begging. It was speaking to her. And worse, it knew things. It knew what she had said to Noah the last night they ever spoke. It knew the first lie she ever told. It knew what she'd whispered to herself as she fell asleep for years, hoping the world would forget her just enough to stop hurting. She couldn't answer it. She didn't dare. Instead, she knelt beside the edge of the hollow, took a deep breath, and lowered herself down. Boots scraping the crumbled stone rim, hands gripping root and rock until she was swallowed whole. The light vanished almost immediately, but the voice remained. It guided her downward, not as a beacon, but like a net tightening. The descent wasn't vertical. It bent sideways, curved back, looped through itself like a tunnel designed by something that had never walked. Her flashlight flickered once, then died. She didn't bother trying to fix it. There was no need. The walls began to glow, dimly. A phosphorescent film pulsing just enough to keep her from falling, just enough to show her what waited in the stone. Faces. Thousands of them, not carved, not painted, molded, flesh pressed into rock, mouths slightly open, eyes shut as if mid-dream. Her fingers brushed against one, and it twitched. The faintest ripple beneath the skin, like something inside had stirred from recognition. She pulled her hand back fast. The voice laughed. Not the echo anymore. It was walking beside her now, invisible, weightless, but pacing her exactly. Emma didn't flinch. She had passed the stage of fear where flinching mattered. This was the deep end part of terror, the place where your body went still just to keep the mind from breaking. The path widened suddenly, revealing a chamber so vast it shouldn't have existed underground. The glow here was stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat made of light and shadow. In the center was a circle, black and perfect, cut clean into the floor. And above it, suspended like a marionette with its strings yanked taut, was a shape, human almost. Twisted absolutely. It had her face, but not the way the reflection did. This one was unfinished. The skin didn't fit. The limbs were wrong. The eyes were mirrors cracked through their centers. Its chest bore the imprint of a mouth. Not where a mouth should be, but pressed inward, like something had bitten it from the inside. Emma stepped forward. The shape convulsed once, then dropped, hitting the stone with a sound that didn't echo. Its mouth opened, and her voice came out. You brought silence with you. But you didn't ask why it followed. Emma said nothing. The thing lifted itself to its knees, trembling, folding limbs against itself in mockery of prayer. The mouths don't open for sound. They open for memory. Yours fed us first. Now we remember enough to wake. Wake what? She finally whispered. The shape grinned, teeth too many, too sharp. The part of the world that forgot itself. The part that remembers you. It reached forward, slow, shaking, and touched the center of the black circle. The room shifted, like it had always been tilted, and now gravity remembered. Emma stumbled, her legs heavy, her ears filled with the sound of her own breath stopping, mid-inhale, and then she saw it, the third mouth. It didn't open like the others. It revealed itself, not a door, not a gate, a hole in the air, a rip that pulsed with lightless depth. Through it, she saw nothing, but she felt everything. The weight of forgotten names, the pull of voices she had never used, and at its very center a figure. No body, no shape, just pressure, recognition. It spoke without speaking. Say it. She fell to her knees. The unnamed buzzed against her ribs, trying to rise. She could feel the pieces of herself beginning to break off. Her memories of childhood, of Noah, of herself in the mirror, all sliding backward, melting into the chamber like wax. Say it, the voice repeated, in every tone she had ever known. Her mouth opened. The unnamed clawed its way up her throat. But just before it escaped, she looked down at the journal, now open on the floor beside her. One line stared back at her, scrawled in her brother's unmistakable hand. Don't speak what it gives you. Speak what you stole back. Emma clenched her jaw shut. The unnamed screamed within her. She fought the convulsion rising in her chest. The tears burned as she forced herself to remember her name. The real one. Not the rewritten, borrowed, reflected version. The one she said before the silence. Before the tower. Before the lake. Emma, she croaked, barely a whisper. Emmeline Vale. Her voice cracked the air. The shape in front of her recoiled. The whole trembled. The third mouth began to collapse, not inwards, but outwards, folding reality back on itself. The chamber shook. The mirrors in the creature's eyes shattered, and in the dark, something screamed her name in a voice that wasn't hers, but wanted to be. The next thing she knew, she was above ground. Lying in the snow, the sky overhead was wrong. Not night, not day, but a flat slate of memory, blinking like eyes that had finally closed. The hollow was gone. The town, gone. Her reflection gone, but carved into the trees around her, burned into the bark in black streaks like ink. One phrase repeated over and over, we remember. Emma stood in a place that shouldn't have existed anymore. Crown's Hollow had vanished, collapsed, buried, burned out of time, but the air still tasted like it. Sharp coppery, soaked in the kind of silence that followed not peace, but surrender. The trees bore the last proof that the town had ever lived, their trunks slashed with those three damning words. We remember. Not carved with knives or burned by fire. Ink. Thick, oozing, blacker than shadow, and still wet when she brushed her fingers across it. She waited to wake. To blink and find herself back in the ruined church, or in the attic, or beneath her sheets, hearing only the wind. But reality didn't shift. The chill didn't fade. The ink stayed, and her name, it still felt like her name. That was something. The third mouth hadn't taken her, but it had left a mark just beneath her ribs, a slow, drumming H that came not with pain, but weight. Like she was carrying something she didn't know how to set down. She had said her name, her real name, and it had mattered. It had forced the unnamed back into the pit, had shut the third mouth before it could finish what it started. But Emma knew a closing didn't mean something was over. It meant something had been heard. The walk back to the car took longer than it should have. The woods had changed while she was below. Paths she'd walked just hours ago now bent in strange angles. Like the trees were leaning to whisper about her, twisting to give her just enough room to pass. Barely. The sounds of the forest returned in odd bursts. A crow cawed, then reversed its call. Leaves rustled, then fell up instead of down. Somewhere nearby, she swore she heard a child's laugh, short and sharp, as if it had been pulled from a long, lost tape and left playing on repeat. But she reached the road. Her car was still there, dusted with frost, headlights off, battery somehow intact. She climbed into the driver's seat and didn't start the engine. She just sat, breathing, repeating her name under her breath like a ritual. Emmeline Vale, over and over. Her voice real and ragged. She didn't stop until her breath steadied, until the achy under her sternum dulled to a pulse, until she believed it. Back in Dunmere, things had changed again. People looked at her now. but not with the warmth or suspicion she remembered. They looked at her like a painting they'd seen in a dream, half forgotten but unforgettable, like a story they couldn't quite place but knew ended badly. They greeted her, nodded politely, but none of them said her name. Not anymore, not since the mouth had spoken it. The town was watching itself now. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Doors stayed locked in daylight. Mirrors had been covered in linen in most of the homes she passed. Someone was remembering, even if they couldn't say why. The reflection might be gone, but the idea of it still breathed. A cautionary whisper embedded into the corners of Dummer's memory. She stopped by the library. Mrs. Reddick wasn't there. The desk was empty, the ledger open. But every book on the shelf labeled local history had been removed, vanished. Except one. It sat in the center of the reading table, spine cracked, pages warped with water damage, no title on the cover. Inside were only names, handwritten, endless. Dozens of them had been crossed out, line after line in red, but hers remained. Emma Lynn Vale, no line through it, just a circle drawn in black. And beneath it, one new note: the mouths aren't dead, just listening. She snapped the book shut, heart pounding. Behind her, a floorboard creaked, not from footsteps, but from weight. Like the building had bent ever so slightly, under the burden of something remembering too hard. She turned, expecting Mrs. Reddick, but no one was there. That night, back at the cottage, the mist returned. Not dense, not overwhelming, just enough to blur the edges of reality. Emma stood at her front door and watched it crawl along the grass, threading through the fence posts, curling around the steps. It didn't come inside, not yet, but it hovered, waiting, tasting the air. She went to the mirror in the hallway, uncovered it, and stared at herself for a long, long time. No mimicry, no delay, no copycat movements, just her face, thinner now, tired, but still hers. "I'm still here," she said to the reflection. "You didn't win." The mirror didn't respond, but the silence in the house shifted, gently. And for the first time since the tower, it didn't feel empty. It felt acknowledged. Then the knock came. 3 short raps. Not on the door, 3 knocks. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just final. They didn't echo through the house the way they should have. The sound didn't bounce off the walls or skitter into corners like normal things do. It landed. Heavy, intentional. Like it had been rehearsed. Emma didn't move at first. She didn't call out. She didn't pretend not to hear. She simply stood frozen in the hallway, watching her own reflection watching her back, waiting to see if the mirror would blink first. The knock didn't come again. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of her door had already said enough. Slowly, she walked to the entrance. Every part of her screamed not to open it. Her skin buzzed with the same low hum she'd felt in the second mouth, when the world had begun to turn inside out. But she had closed that. She had faced what waited in Crown's Hollow. She had said her name and made it stick. This was her house, her voice, her silence. She opened the door. No one stood there, but something had been left behind. On the porch, just beyond the doormat, lay a small black book, leather-bound, worn, damp around the edges as though it had just been pulled from deep soil. It pulsed faintly beneath the mist, not with light, but with presence. It wanted to be touched. It wanted to be opened. Emma didn't pick it up right away. She stared at it, uncertain, as a cold breeze curled behind her ankles, nudging her forward. She stepped outside barefoot, the wood of the porch cold and slightly damp underfoot. She crouched, reached down slowly, and lifted the book. It was warm, and the second her fingers closed around it, the mist rolled back like it had finished its errand. Inside, the pages weren't blank. They were full of drawings. Not hers. Not Noah's. But hers, as drawn by someone else. Pages of her face in charcoal, in pen, in red crayon, staring with eyes too dark, too wide. Some pages were filled with sequences. Her walking through a forest, her kneeling beside a mirror, her speaking into nothing. She flipped faster, heart racing, and then she found it, the last page. A depiction of her, standing in a field of bare soil beneath a sky with no stars, surrounded by figures, not people, not quite, tall, faceless, and every one of them held a mirror. Emma's name was scrawled across the bottom of the page, not in ink, but in scratches. Like the paper itself had tried to claw it out of its own skin. Beneath that a date, 3 days from now. She didn't sleep that night, not even in shifts. She sat with the book open beside her, the mirror uncovered, the journal in her lap. The house creaked more than usual. The pipes hissed without prompting. But nothing came through the windows. Nothing pressed at the walls. It wasn't like before. There were no more tests, no more imitations. This was different. This was counting down. The next morning, she went to the church, not to pray, to look. It had been empty since the reflection first revealed itself on the altar, and though the structure still stood, the inside had changed. Pews were overturned. Stained glass no longer glowed. Every crucifix had been turned upside down, not broken, just gently twisted by some quiet force. In the pulpit, a small basin of water remained. She approached it carefully. And when she looked down into the still surface, she didn't see herself. She saw Noah, older than she remembered, worn, lean, and watching her, not blinking, not moving. Just staring through the water like it was a screen that had been waiting for her gaze to connect. Then his lips parted, and his voice filled her ears, not from the basin, but from inside her skull. The mouths weren't made. They were remembered. And now that you've been heard by all three, they don't need to hide anymore. You're not their messenger, Emma. You're their doorway. Her breath caught. She leaned back, stumbling, knocking into a pew. The water went still again. The image vanished. But something lingered. The sense of being opened, of something stepping through her and not stopping. By dusk, her house was no longer her own. Not haunted, not invaded, just claimed. The black book now sat on her dining room table. Its pages flipped in still air. The mirror in the hall shimmered faintly, like heat over asphalt. And her own voice whispered things she couldn't understand through the static of the radio, even though it was turned off. On the floor of the living room, someone had drawn a circle. She didn't know when. She didn't remember doing it. But the chalk was red, and inside it was written the name she hadn't dared speak since the third mouth, etched there in jagged letters, the unnamed. She stared at it, and the air around her answered. 3 days, it said from nowhere and everywhere. Then we gather. 3 days. The words settled into Emma's bones like ice packed into an open wound. Not from pain, at least not yet, but from certainty. There would be no running. Not now. The third mouth hadn't just opened, it had left the world slightly bent around her. She wasn't watching the storm anymore. She was the eye of it. And it was moving toward her from every direction at once. The field in the final drawing, the one with the faceless watchers and the mirrors. She'd seen it before. Not in dreams, not in memory, in real life. Years ago, just outside Dummer's Edge, where the trees broke for a while and the grass never grew right. Locals called it Deadroot Clearing, though no one could agree on why. She'd been there once with Noah's kids, dared each other to run through it at dusk. Back then, it was just an ugly patch of earth that refused to play along with the rest of the forest. Now, it was the place where the book said everything would converge. 3 days. Noah had known. Somehow, through whatever silence he'd fallen into, he'd seen ahead. His journal hinted at the meeting, even if it hadn't dared say it plainly. When the third mouth closes, the fourth opens beneath you. She hadn't understood it before. There was no fourth mouth. Not literally. But now she did. The first 3 were places, anchored by memory, shaped by voice. The fourth was her. She was the breach now. Emma spent the first day preparing the house, not defending it, not trying to fortify against the things that might come. That would have been foolish. She wasn't locking the doors to keep them out. She was arranging the pieces for when they arrived. She moved mirrors into every room, cleared out drawers and closets and spaces that had held memory. She opened the windows, let the mist curl its way in. She turned every radio speaker and voice recorder on and placed them in a circle around the living room. And then she waited. The whispering began that night. Not loud, but persistent. Her name first, then other things, not words exactly, more like ideas stretched into syllables, repeating phrases she didn't recognize but somehow understood. The silence will make its shape in you. You are the fourth. We gather not to speak, but to listen. She dreamed of being soil, not buried, just dirt. She felt herself scattered, pulled thin across a field, dug into by hands she couldn't see. And in the center of her scattered self, something was planted. Not a seed, a mirror. Day 2. People started noticing her differently again. The barista at the coffee shop paused, stared too long at her face, then blinked like he'd come up for air and said, "You look familiar." She nodded, didn't reply. Walked out before he could ask more. At the hardware store, a woman she didn't recognize offered her free nails and rope. Said, "Just in case. Storm's coming." Emma asked what kind of storm. The woman didn't answer. She just blinked too slowly and walked away. That night, she heard the knock again. 3 raps. Then silence. She opened the door. Nothing there. But now the mirrors in her house no longer reflected what was in the room. They showed other rooms, other houses, other versions of her home that didn't quite match. Slight differences. Furniture that didn't belong. Books she never owned. Photos of her with people she'd never met. And in every one of those reflections, someone stood just barely out of frame. Watching. Waiting. By the time the 3rd day came, Emma didn't feel hunger anymore, or thirst, or sleep. Not because she was transcending anything. There was no grace in it. Her body was just no longer the one being measured. The things that remembered her weren't interested in her biology. They were watching what her voice would do next, what her memory would shape into when the hour came. She walked to Deadroot Clearing just before sunset. The book was right. The field was wrong. The soil there wasn't soil anymore. It was cracked skin, warm to the touch, breathing almost. And in its center stood a mirror as tall as a house, shaped like a door. No frame, just suspended silver, rippling like water in a stiff wind. Around it 12 figures had gathered, all identical in height and build, all faceless. Each held a small mirror over its chest like a shield. But their bodies were wrong, just slightly. Movements that lagged, heads that tilted too far. And not one of them made a sound. They didn't need to. Emma stepped into the clearing, and the mirror door brightened at her presence. Not shining, not glowing. It just focused, like it had been waiting for her face to arrive. She felt the unnamed pulse inside her again, the final syllables trying to stitch themselves back together. But she didn't speak. Not yet. The figures stepped aside, made a path. She walked forward, heart pounding. The mirror rippled once, then stilled. And inside it, she saw not herself, but every moment she had tried to forget. Her mother's funeral. Her last fight with Noah. The time she'd curled in the attic as the silence learned her shape. All of it there, flickering in rapid sequence. A history not of facts, but of pain. And in the center of it all, the thing that had worn her face. Waiting, it opened its mouth. And this time, it didn't mimic. It asked, "What do you remember?" Emma reached into her coat, pulled out the journal, held it to the mirror. "This," she said. "I remember this." The mirror began to crack. The mirror shattered soundlessly. No crash. No splinters flying through the air. It simply fractured inward. The cracks racing like veins through liquid silver until the whole surface collapsed into 100 shifting shards. But they didn't fall. They hovered in place, suspended like broken stars in a sky that no longer followed rules. Emma didn't flinch. She just stared forward, journal still outstretched in her hand. as if presenting it was some kind of ritual offering. The faceless figures didn't move either. 12 of them, ranged in perfect stillness, holding mirrors that now reflected not her, but each other. An endless loop of repeating emptiness. Something about that loop felt unstable, like each copy was losing a fraction of itself in the chain, growing thinner and less distinct the farther back it went. If she stared long enough, she suspected they would begin to vanish entirely. The silence that followed the breaking was thick, not quiet. Heavy, it pushed at her chest, her ears, her thoughts, as if trying to drown her in absence. And in that density of nothingness, a voice rose, not her own, not even an echo of her voice. It was too large, too old, too still. It came from the shards. Each one vibrated, humming a separate tone, forming a chorus of broken pieces. You have remembered more than most. Emma didn't answer. She didn't know how. But what you remember is only yours. It cannot close what is open. It can only mark what must be broken next. The largest shard drifted forward, spinning slowly. In its surface, she saw a new version of herself. Not present, not future, but something undone. Eyes too wide. Mouth a clean line carved where skin hadn't meant to part. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't even breathing. This version of her simply stared, not with fear, with recognition. Emma's fingers clenched around the journal. It felt heavier now, wet at the edges. She looked down and saw that it had begun to bleed. Real blood, thick and hot, leaking from the spine like a wound had been hiding inside it all this time. The faceless figures turned their heads toward her in unison. No words. No movement. Just a shift of intent. You brought them back, the voice said. Now they wait for the name you will choose. Emma stepped closer to the fractured mirror. The silver shards began to rearrange, spinning faster, clustering around the space where the door had once been whole. A shape reformed, not a door now, but a body, and it was hers, built from the fragments of memory and silence. From every name she'd tried to forget, and every face she'd seen staring back through the glass. The mouth opened, and she spoke. I am not the fourth mouth. I am the one that follows. Emma blinked, because it wasn't her voice at all. It wasn't the voice she remembered, or the one that had mimicked her, or even the one from the mirror lake. This one was younger. It was a child's voice. Her voice. She staggered backward, because she remembered now, all of it. She remembered being 7, standing in front of the old well at the edge of the woods behind her house. She remembered whispering a name into the stone because she'd heard it in a dream. She remembered feeling cold and safe and powerful when the echo came back. She had opened the first mouth, not Noah. Her. The reflections. The silence. The things that wore her shape. It all started because she had started it. And now the thing built of her. This second self, this mirror-born husk, spoke again. You asked to be remembered. Now we do. The faceless watchers lifted their mirrors as one. Emma turned, breath catching in her throat, because in each mirror something stepped forward. Figures. Dozens. Hundreds. All shaped like people, but all wrong. Smiles too wide. Eyes missing. Limbs out of rhythm. And at the front of the line, walking without touching the ground, Noah. Or what had once been Noah. He looked exactly as he had in the lake. Eyes hollow. Expression blank. But something deeper underneath, a kind of pleading buried beneath the mimicry. He reached out. Emma, he said, you don't have to remember alone. She wanted to run. Wanted to scream. Wanted to forget again. But she couldn't. The memory was hers. The fault was hers. The mouths didn't choose her. She had built them. Her voice had taught them how to be. The ground cracked. The circle of watchers began to hum. And the child's voice inside the mirror. Body said the last thing she expected to hear. Speak the unnamed now, or they will speak it for you. Emma fell to her knees. The word pressed against her teeth, rising from that old, unused part of her soul. It wanted to escape, and if it did, if she let it, it would mark the world with her sound forever. It would mean the breach stayed open, that her body would no longer be her own, that the silence would never again be still. She opened her mouth. The unname hovered on her tongue. She breathed in, and saw Noah, saw the child she had been, saw the weight of all the things she'd dragged behind her. And she said, nothing. She closed her mouth, clenched her jaw, refused, and the world shattered again, not from noise, from absence, from her choice not to give it what it wanted. The mirror being screamed. The watchers dropped their mirrors. The clearing imploded. Emma woke up lying on her living room floor. The radio was off. The mirrors were covered. The chalk circle was gone, and the journal gone too. But something had been left in its place. A single page. Blank, except for a sentence. You broke the cycle. But something remembers, and beneath it, in red ink, we are listening still. For 2 days, Emma didn't speak. Not because she couldn't, but because she wasn't sure which voice would come out. The silence that filled her home after the unnamed was buried, refused, wasn't peaceful. It pulsed, like a breath held too long, waiting for a release that never came. The air had weighed again, though not the unbearable kind she'd known before. This was the pressure of expectation, of something waiting patiently just beyond the threshold, ready to lean in the moment she slipped. Not a threat, a presence. Every mirror in the house was draped now, even the small one above the bathroom sink. She couldn't risk glancing into anything that might show more than her face. Since the clearing, since that final moment of denial, she no longer trusted her own reflection. The thing that had taken her voice, her shape, her memories. It might have been shattered, but that didn't mean it had vanished. Things like that didn't need a body. They needed attention. And attention was a form of nourishment. Emma paced the kitchen floor long after midnight, barefoot, hands jammed deep in the pockets of her coat, as if trying to keep herself stitched together. The house moaned with wind, though none of the windows were open. Floorboards shifted with her weight, but sometimes, just sometimes, she heard a creak that didn't match her steps, like someone else moving, slightly out of sync, watching, learning her rhythm, waiting for her to stop. She didn't sleep. She didn't dare. On the third morning, a letter arrived. Not in the mailbox. On the kitchen table. She hadn't heard the door, hadn't seen anyone pass by. But there it was, folded once. Pale blue envelope sealed with wax that bore no mark. Just heat, pressed stillness, as if someone had sealed it using the cold instead of fire. She stared at it for nearly an hour before touching it. When she did, her fingertips burned. Not from temperature, but from memory. The wax broke like old bones, crumbling. Inside, a single line you refused to speak. But the others remember your silence. Beneath that, in smaller writing, return to the tower. Before they do, she knew which one. The Bellwater Tower, where it had all started. Where she first saw her reflection delay. Where Noah had disappeared. Where the first voice learned her name. The drive back was quieter than it should have been. No traffic. No wildlife. Even the sky seemed to dim as she approached. Bellwater sat like a scar on the edge of the world now, not a town so much as a remembered place. Roads narrowed. Buildings leaned. Signs bore names that had no meaning anymore. When she passed the gas station near the main turnoff, the pumps had been covered in tarp. Someone had spray painted over the windows. One word, Lysten. The tower rose beyond the town, skeletal against the sky. It hadn't changed. Same jagged bricks, same hollow bell housing at the top, same arched door that seemed too small for the weight of what lived inside. But now, as she approached, the wind around it stilled completely. No breeze, no rustle of leaf or grass, just a hum, low and steady, as if the tower had been breathing this whole time. Emma stepped through the threshold. Inside, the air folded in on itself. Not with pressure, but recognition. She belonged here. That was the first and worst feeling. The spiral stairs stretched up into the dark, covered in dust that had clearly never settled. She walked slowly, feeling each step thrum beneath her boots, like the building was listening. At the top, the bell chamber sat empty. The rope that once hung in the center was gone, but in its place stood something else, a chair, wooden, ordinary, facing the bell, and on it, Noah's coat, clean, folded neatly. She stepped toward it, heart in her throat. But the moment her fingers touched the fabric, a voice filled the chamber. Not hers, not Noah's, someone else, something else. You stopped the mouth, but not the echo. The shadows in the corners began to pulse. We listened before there were names, before mirrors, before breath. Emma turned slowly, backing toward the staircase, but there was no retreat. The doorway was gone. The stairs were gone. Only walls now, close and circular. The chair remained, and the coat unfolded itself, rising, filling, not with body, with shape, with memory. It took a step forward, wore no face, but her heartbeat changed tempo to match its pace, as if some forgotten part of her recognized its rhythm. We were not banished, it said. You birthed us when you forgot. The voice bent in pitch, childlike and old in the same breath. Do you know what silence remembers most? Emma stared, fists clenched. No, she whispered. Tell me. It stepped closer, face inches from hers now, though still blank. It remembers who you were before you thought you were anyone at all. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out, because in that moment, just for a second, she didn't remember her own name, only the echo of the voice that had first called her. The walls pulsed. The bell above shook with soundless weight, and then everything went still. One final whisper, we are the ones who never stopped listening. And the light went out. Emma didn't black out. She didn't wake up. She simply shifted, like a coin turned over in someone else's hand. 1 second she was in the tower's bell chamber, surrounded by shadows with no breath. The next, she stood in a room she'd never seen before, and yet, she somehow knew she'd been there once. Or maybe she'd only dreamed she had. The walls were bone, white. Not painted, but bleached. The air was thick, not with heat or dust, but with weightless pressure, like standing in the eye of a hurricane you couldn't see. No doors, no windows, no seams. Just a single chair in the center, identical to the one in the tower. Plain, wooden, angled slightly toward nothing. And in that nothing, Emma felt something watching. The room didn't echo. Her footsteps made no sound. Even her breathing registered only as movement, not noise. This place had no patience for voice. It had never heard one before. Or perhaps it had devoured so many that it refused to allow another. She tried to speak, just a whisper, her name, but her throat locked. Her lips moved. No sound followed, not even silence. This wasn't a mute place. It was a place where sound was unmade. She sat slowly in the chair, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know what else to do. The moment she did, the walls shifted. Not physically, not visibly, but the feeling changed, like 1,000 unseen heads turned toward her at once. It wasn't anticipation. It was memory. It was recognition. A light began to pulse from the ceiling. Not light like from a bulb, but a memory of brightness. It hit her skin and pulled warmth out, not in. And then the voices began, not out loud, inside. They came like waves through her chest, old, fragmented sentences she'd never said, but had heard in her dreams. Conversations she'd had in childhood that had never happened. Noah's voice, calling her from behind closed doors she never remembered opening. Her own mother's lullaby, except it twisted at the last note, as if someone had rewritten it halfway through. Emmeline Vale, a voice said, not hers, not familiar, but deep and final. You buried the word, but its roots still breathe. You denied the fourth mouth, but the soil it opened still remembers your shape. She clutched the arms of the chair, nails digging in, resisting the urge to curl in on herself. She had refused the unnamed. She had stopped herself from becoming what the mouths wanted. That should have been the end. But the room disagreed. A section of the wall began to ripple, then split, forming a vertical seam that oozed darkness. Not just shadow, a living absence. Something stepped out, or rather unstepped. It didn't move like a person. It didn't walk, it arrived. It was tall, draped in what looked like wet paper. Thin limbs, no face. In its hand it held something small, a piece of mirror. Cracked down the middle, Emma stood instinctively. Her legs burned with tension, but she held her ground. The thing held the shard out. Reflected in it was her, but younger, the child, the girl who had whispered into the well. The girl who didn't understand that names were more dangerous when you didn't know who you were giving them to. And the girl was smiling, not innocently, knowingly. The voice came again. You thought you remembered enough to choose, but you never remembered the first moment. The mouth wasn't opened by your voice. It was opened by your desire to be heard. The creature reached forward and pressed the mirror, shard against Emma's chest. And then she saw everything. The well, the whisper, the look on Noah's face when he realized she'd said something she shouldn't have. How he tried to protect her, tried to contain what she'd called, and how, in the end, it had been him who'd sacrificed his own voice to keep the word from speaking itself into the world. Noah hadn't vanished. He had been absorbed, held as a memory in the mouths, preserved, because he was the only one who knew what silence truly sounded like. Emma dropped to her knees. The mirror shard clattered against the floor but didn't break, and finally her voice returned. Not loud, not strong, but real. She spoke one word, Noah, and the room cracked. The whiteness around her fractured into lines that bled darkness. The creature stumbled back, hissing, not in sound, but in motion, like its body had remembered pain. The chair burst into flame without fire. The floor buckled beneath her, and the seam, the door of absence, opened wider. She ran, not toward the light, not toward escape, but into the darkness. Because she knew now that the only way out wasn't through the tower. It was through the silence she'd started. The well. The first mouth. Emma tumbled. Time fell with her. And when she landed, she was no longer in the white room. She was somewhere far older. She was in the dirt. And something was rising to meet her. The air smelled of soil and iron. Not rot, not yet, but something deeper. Something waiting to decay. Emma lay in darkness, cheek pressed to cold stone, the whisper of damp roots brushing her skin. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. She had returned. Not to the memory of the well, but to the real place. To the beginning. Somehow, impossibly, she was back beneath the well where she had first spoken the name. Except now, the well was gone. No bricks. No shaft. Just an open wound in the ground, surrounded by nothing but shadow and slow, breathing silence. Emma sat up, dirt clinging to her hands, her knees, her face. She reached for the shard of mirror that had fallen with her. It lay a few feet away, half, buried in muck, pulsing faintly like it still held light from a world above. She gripped it carefully and looked in. The child version of her no longer smiled. It stared back blankly, eyes wide, mouth slightly parted, as if waiting for something to fill it. A voice, a word, a mistake. Emma closed her eyes. She could feel it now. Every mistake she had ever made trailing behind her like smoke, and every memory she'd suppressed creeping to the front of her mind. The silence in this place didn't just exist, it took form. It sifted through her thoughts, nudging open the ones she'd locked shut. She remembered Noah's panic the day after the well, how he tried to talk to her but stopped short every time he looked into her eyes, how he started avoiding reflections, how his voice got quieter, fainter, until one day it simply didn't come back. She had blamed the hollow, the town, the tower, but this was the seed, and it had been planted by her. The walls of the underground chamber shuddered, not from motion, but from sound that couldn't find shape, a pressure built in the air, squeezing her lungs, warping her heartbeat into a new rhythm. A voice was coming, not like before, not mimicry. This one was original, ancient, still forming. Emma stood, and then she saw it, the mouth, not a metaphor, not a memory, but a real, physical thing rising from the ground like a blister in the world's skin. Enormous, veined, made of soil and teeth and forgotten prayers. It pulsed once, twice, and opened, no tongue, just void, a darkness so complete it seemed to erase the air around it. She stepped closer, drawn by instinct and dread. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew that whatever she left behind, it would follow unless she finished what she'd started. The moment she reached the lip of the thing, a shape began to rise from within. It was Noah, but not the twisted mimic, not the shadow. It was him. Real, ice-wide body trembling, skin pale and real and alive. He was tangled in roots, chest heaving like someone learning how to breathe again. "Emma?" he whispered. His voice cracked like a dry leaf. She froze. Because hearing his voice, his actual voice, felt like being forgiven for a sin she didn't yet understand. He reached for her, and she took his hand. Their fingers touched, and the ground beneath them screamed, not with noise, with memory. The mouth began to close. Not shut, not silent, but folding in. Trying to keep Noah, trying to keep her. But something was different now. She had not spoken the unnamed, she had denied it. She had chosen not to be its door. And that choice echoed. The air shimmered, and with it, the ground began to pulse like a dying heart. The chamber groaned. 1,000 whispers hissed from the walls, voices calling her back, pleading, bargaining, offering. "One word," they said, "just one, and he stays. One, and it ends. No more watching, no more fear." But Emma didn't speak. Instead, she pulled Noah toward her, wrenching him from the roots with a sound like snapping bone. He gasped, stumbled forward, and for the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears. "You came back," he said. She didn't answer, because there was no answer that mattered now, only action. The mouth shrieked, not with sound, but with rage. Its edges collapsed in on themselves. The void imploded, and with it, the chamber began to fall. Emma grabbed Noah's hand and ran. Through the tunnel she hadn't seen before, now splitting open like a cracked memory. Dirt and rock poured down around them. The light from the mirror shard flickered in her pocket, guiding her forward. Step after step, they climbed through the collapsing underground until, at last, they burst through the soil, into daylight. Real, actual daylight. The well was gone. The woods were silent, but not the same silence. This one was natural. Birds chirped in the distance. Wind rustled through the trees. And Emma collapsed to the ground beside Noah, both of them panting. Alive. Whole. Unspoken. The mirror shard in her pocket burned once, then dimmed. When she pulled it out, it was blank. No reflection. No image. Just smooth silver. She knew what it meant. The mouths had closed. But the world still remembered the shape of the sounds she hadn't said. That would never change. But for now, she had her brother back, and the silence, true silence, held no malice, only peace. For now, they stayed in the woods for hours. Neither Emma nor Noah spoke much, not out of fear, but because words felt heavy now. Every syllable seemed like a trigger. Every breath a potential echo of something best left buried. It wasn't just what they'd escaped. It was what had escaped with them. The mouths were gone, yes, shut, or perhaps just silenced. But Emma could still feel their weight in the air like a scent that lingers long after the fire has been put out. And Noah kept staring at his hands like they didn't belong to him. The sun was beginning to set again when Emma finally stood. "We can't stay here," she said. Her voice sounded distant to her, like it was traveling through glass. "The well's gone." But she didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The ground still held memory. The soil had fed too long on voices not to carry their traces. Noka didn't argue. He just followed. Back at the cottage, the house didn't greet them. It watched. The windows seemed darker. The mirrors remained covered, draped in white sheets that rippled even though there was no wind inside. Emma paused at the threshold before stepping in, half expecting the familiar knock. 3 short raps that always meant something else had arrived first. But nothing came. The silence wasn't dead anymore. It was cautious. Inside, everything was as she'd left it, and not. The journal was back. It sat on the coffee table. Pages curled, spine split slightly where she'd last held it. But when she picked it up, the ink had changed. No longer blood red. Now it was black, steady, sane. A message sprawled across 2 pages. Your silence was louder than the name. That was the difference. That was the key. Underneath it, in the corner, a small, fresh note in different handwriting. They still remember. But they no longer listen. You closed the door. But you didn't erase the map. Emma traced her fingers along the bottom of the page, feeling the indentation. Whoever had written this had done so recently, possibly while she was in the well, possibly before. Or maybe time didn't move in a straight line for the ones who watched from mirrors. Noah walked through the house slowly, stopping at each mirror. "Why did you cover them?" he asked. Emma hesitated. "Because they remember too." He nodded, then peeled the sheet from the hall mirror. And nothing happened. No delay mimicry, no lurking double, just his reflection, tired, but real. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Emma didn't lift the others yet. She wasn't ready. Not because she thought something would come through, but because she couldn't handle the possibility of nothing staring back. That night, she dreamed of the field again, deadroot clearing. Only this time, there were no faceless watchers, no mirror door, no circle, just snow, thin and soundless, covering the earth like forgiveness. She walked alone, barefoot, the chill biting at her skin. And then, out of nowhere, she saw the chair, the one from the tower, from the white room, from the mouths, except now it was empty. And beside it, carved into the dirt, 3 words, "Don't speak yet." She woke before dawn, and the knock finally came. 3 slow raps, but this time, not on the door, on the window. She froze. Noah heard it too. He sat upright on the couch, the blanket slipping from his shoulders. "Did you?" Emma nodded. She didn't move. The knocking didn't come again. She walked to the window, gently drew back the curtain. Nothing was there. Just a small handprint on the glass, too small to be hers, too old to be new. The next day they returned to Dunmere. It was colder now, the seasons shifting faster than nature intended. Leaves had gone brittle. The sky had dulled. The town moved slower, people speaking in hushed tones, like they all shared a secret they couldn't name, and perhaps they did. At the library, Mrs. Reddick was gone, her desk covered in dust, but a note was taped to the old ledger. History is no longer a place. It's a presence. Be careful what remembers you. Emma opened the drawer beneath the desk. Inside, the list of names remained. Dozens of them. Some circled, some crossed out. Hers still there, unmarked now. But Noah's had changed. It was written twice. Once as Noah Vale, his real name, and once below it, in shaky handwriting echo. Emma closed the drawer gently. Some names weren't stolen. They were shed. Like skin, like memory. Like the residue of who you once had to be. Outside, a mirror flickered in the shop window across the street. And for the first time, she walked toward it without fear. The reflection was waiting. It didn't shift. Didn't tilt its head or mimic some motion out of time. It just stared back. Emma's face, as it should be, with no delay. But there was something underneath the surface of the glass, like smoke trailing the lines of her jaw. A faint shadow pressing outward from behind her eyes, like memory refusing to settle. Noah stood a few feet behind, his own reflection dimmer, harder to read. The glass didn't fight them anymore, but it didn't welcome them either. It tolerated their presence, like something ancient watching through shut eyes, pretending to sleep. Emma reached up, hand trembling slightly, and pressed her palm to the mirror. No ripple, no cold. Just smooth, solid resistance. She held it there for a long time. Long enough that her skin began to warm the glass. Long enough to feel, in some strange corner of her mind, that someone on the other side might be doing the same. She didn't pull away until Noah whispered her name. "They're not done, are they?" he asked. Emma didn't answer. She couldn't, because deep down, she already knew the truth. The mouths had closed, yes, but the echoes hadn't faded. The voices might no longer hunt for open bodies or willing names, but they still remembered the ones who spoke first. The ones who fed them. She and Noah were marked, not cursed, not doomed, just noted, noticed, remembered. They spent that night in an old motel on the edge of Dunmere. One of the kind with buzzing lights and televisions bolted into the wall. Emma flipped through the channels, but every station was static. Not white noise, gray, like ash, and through it faint whispers tried to form. Not words, shapes of words, ghosts of syllables. She turned it off. Noah sat on the bed across from her, cross-legged, his notebook open again for the first time since the clearing. But he wasn't writing. Just staring at the blank page like it might start telling him something. "I don't remember how it started," he said quietly. "I thought I did. I really believed I was the one who let it in." "You weren't," Emma said. "But I thought I was. For years." She met his eyes. "Maybe that's what it needed you to think." The room felt colder suddenly. Not unnatural, just full of all the things they weren't saying. The guilt, the grief, the weight of having survived something that still moved beneath the surface. Emma stood and walked to the mirror on the bathroom door. It was long, full length, warped at the corners. She stared into it, waiting for some sign, some flicker. But it held. And then, without fully understanding why, she whispered, "Do you still see me?" No reply. But on the floor, the carpet curled slightly, just enough to reveal something hidden beneath. A folded note. She bent down, picked it up, unfolded it with shaking hands. 2 sentences, the name still circles. It does not need to be spoken. It only needs to be thought. Emma's stomach twisted, because the truth was, she had thought it. In the well, in the White Room, in the tower. Even now the syllables sat at the edge of her memory, like the lyrics to a song she hadn't meant to memorize. Noah stepped up behind her, reading over her shoulder. "Then what do we do?" he asked. "Never think again." Emma shook her head. "We don't forget. But we don't feed it either. We remember that it's there, but we don't give it meaning. And if it comes back..." She met his eyes in the mirror. "Then we face it again. With silence, if we have to." That night, they dreamed together. Not in metaphor. Somehow, their dreams overlapped. They stood in the clearing, snow falling gently. The chair was there, and this time, a figure sat in it, wrapped in black cloth, faceless, unmoving. But it didn't rise. It didn't speak. It listened. And when they approached, it held something out, a key, simple, rusted. Emma took it. When she did, the figure unraveled, not violently, not tragically, just faded, thread by thread, until there was nothing left but wind. They woke at the same time, and Emma found the key resting on the nightstand beside her. Real. Cold. Waiting. There were still places left to close. She could feel them. Rooms that hadn't been sealed. Mirrors that still remembered. Corners of Dunmere and its outskirts where the silence hadn't been broken, only pushed deeper. The key wasn't just symbolic. It was instruction. Emma turned to Noah as the sun rose through the motel window. "We're not done," she said. He didn't need her to explain. He just stood, grabbed his bag, and nodded. Outside, the air felt lighter. The birds sang again. But every now and then, in the stillness between wind gusts, Emma swore she heard a whisper that matched her breath. Not chasing, just following, like memory does, like names do. The house stood at the edge of the woods, where the trees began to bend inward like they were hiding something. It had no address, no mailbox, no number on the door, because there was no door at all. Just walls, windows, and a roof that slouched like it had been waiting too long to collapse. Emma found it by instinct, not memory. The key in her coat pocket vibrated gently the closer they got, like a compass twitching at the edge of a magnetic storm. Noah followed behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes constantly scanning the shadows. They didn't speak much on the walk through the pines. Neither of them wanted to be the first to name what they were walking toward. The house had been mentioned once in the journal. A throwaway line, back before Noah had lost his voice entirely. If the name echoes too long, the house without doors opens from the inside. At the time, it had meant nothing to her. A metaphor, a strange idea scribbled in desperation. But now, standing before the structure, Emma saw what he meant. The house didn't have to invite you in. If you came carrying the right memories, the right silence, it let you enter from yourself. She touched the exterior wall. It was warm, not like wood or brick or stone, but like flesh that had cooled just past fever. And as her fingers pressed against it, the wall rippled once, then began to sink inward. Not a door, not even an opening, just space unraveling into invitation. Noah stepped forward, alarm on his face. "Emma, I have to," she whispered. He didn't stop her, just stood close, his presence an anchor. And then she stepped inside. The inside was not a house. It was a corridor, impossibly long, impossibly narrow, with walls that pulsed in and out like lungs. The floor looked like wood but bent under her weight, too soft. The ceiling dripped water that evaporated before it reached the ground. There were no rooms, no branches. Just one hallway that curved slightly to the left, endlessly. As she walked, she realized that the further she moved, the more she felt lighter, like memories were peeling off her back, not erased, just removed, hung up on invisible hooks behind her. She stopped once to check her reflection in the glossy surface of the wall. She didn't see herself. She saw the child again. But now, the child was seated at a table, writing. Over and over, one phrase, "I didn't mean to open it." Emma turned away, kept walking. Eventually, she came to a room that wasn't there. It didn't appear. It arrived. She found herself standing in a circular chamber, lit by something that wasn't light, an ambient glow that seemed to pulse directly from the walls. And in the center, a pedestal. Upon it, a box made of mirrored shards fused together, no hinges, no seams. The moment she stepped forward, the key in her pocket burned through the fabric of her coat and dropped into her hand, hot and humming. She didn't hesitate. She inserted it into the space between two fragments. There was no lock, no click, just acceptance. And the box unfolded. Inside, a single tape recorder. Old, dusty, familiar. She picked it up and pressed play. At first, nothing. Then Noah's voice, not the voice he'd used recently. The one from before, from when he was 10, young, whole, terrified. "If you're hearing this, Emma, it means I didn't make it out. Or maybe you didn't. I don't know. I recorded this after the well. After you whispered the name. I didn't blame you. I never did. You didn't understand. None of us did." A pause. "I saw it first in the mirror in Dad's room. It copied me wrong. Not like a reflection. Like it wanted to be me. And when I turned away, I heard my voice still talking. Saying things I didn't say. That's when I knew. It wasn't watching us. It was learning us." Another pause. A shaky breath. "The name you spoke wasn't a name. It was a memory. Something left behind by the last mouth that was closed. And now it wants to live again. Through you. Through me. Through anyone who listens." A faint click. The recording cut out. Emma stood still, fingers wrapped tightly around the recorder. Noah had left this for her. Hidden it in a place beyond memory, beyond time. He had known what was coming long before she did. And he had tried to help her, even from inside the silence. She stepped out of the chamber, the box closing behind her with a sound like a breath finally released. The corridor reformed ahead of her, leading outward. But as she began to walk, she saw them, etched into the wall, dozens of names. Some she recognized. Many she didn't. Each one surrounded by a thin circle carved into the surface like a mouth. Her name was at the very end. Not circled, but underlined. Twice. Outside, Noah was waiting. He hadn't moved. When he saw her, his eyes flicked down to her hand. What did it show you? Emma held up the recorder. Your voice. From before. You left it for me. His eyes narrowed. I never recorded anything. Emma froze. What? I never? Emma? I lost my voice days after the well. You remember that? I couldn't have recorded anything. She stared down at the device. It was still warm. Still real. But it had spoken in his voice. In a memory she hadn't lived through. Noah stepped back. Emma, what if it's still trying to make you remember something that didn't happen? Emma looked at the recorder again. At her own reflection in its glossy, dark surface. And this time, her reflection smiled without her. Emma dropped the recorder like it had burned her, the sound of its plastic casings striking the forest floor far too loud in the hush that surrounded them. Birds didn't chirp. Wind didn't move. The stillness wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence that waited for an answer. The kind that leaned in when you hesitated. And she was hesitating. Noah didn't move to pick it up. He just stared at her eyes wide, not with fear exactly, but with something worse. Recognition. Not of her. Of something close to her. What did you see in the mirror? He asked slowly, his voice taut like a wire about to snap. Emma didn't answer right away. Her thoughts were still snared in the way her reflection had moved. How it had smiled without her permission. Not a grin, not mockery, a knowing smile. As if it had been waiting for her to look at it. As if the box in the house without doors had opened something inside her, not just outside. I think it's not just the mouths, she said finally. I think the name. It leaves pieces of itself in people. Like shrapnel. Tiny things you don't notice until you bleed from them. Noah's mouth twisted. So you think it put something in you? Emma nodded. Or it woke something up. He exhaled slowly and looked down at the recorder. And what if that thing knows how to sound like me? That hit harder than it should have. Because now that he said it, she realized she couldn't recall anything specific in that recording that proved it was real. No detail only Noah would know. No secret. Just fear and fragments. A message shaped like memory, but smooth enough to slip past her doubt. And in a place like that, where reality bent around silence, maybe doubt wasn't even enough to protect you. She kicked the recorder into the underbrush. Not gently, not cautiously. She buried it with her heel and turned away before she could change her mind. They left the woods by a different path. The same one they used to sneak through as kids, long before the well, before the hollow had changed them. It twisted around the old stream bed and behind what used to be the dog park, now just rusted chains and empty frames where swings once hung. As they walked, Emma realized how much of their town had vanished without being destroyed. No fire, no decay, just absent. Like it had been peeled away from the world without anyone remembering it was ever there. By the time they reached the main road, the sky had begun to dim again. Sunset came early now, as if light was growing afraid to linger. They passed the church on Hollow Hill, boarded up, windows blacked out, and Emma paused. Something about it scratched at her memory. Do you remember the bell? She asked. Noah turned, frowning. What bell? The one that used to ring at night, she said. Not during services. After dark. I used to hear it when I couldn't sleep. He looked back at the church. I thought that was a dream. Emma shook her head slowly. No, it was real. I remember the sound. And suddenly, she did. A bell that didn't chime. It groaned. Long, low, metallic notes that scraped at the edges of hearing. She took a step toward the church. Noah grabbed her arm. Don't. It's part of it, she said. I don't know how I know, but I do. The look he gave her wasn't anger. It was concern. And underneath it, fear. Not of the church, of her. Inside, the air smelled like rust and damp wood. The pews had been pushed against the walls, as if someone had tried to make room for something larger than prayer. The altar had been stripped bare. And hanging from the rafters, where the crucifix had once been, was a mirror. Just one, large, cracked, hung like a question. Emma stepped closer, compelled not by curiosity but by recognition. This mirror was old, older than the tower, older than the clearing, older than the mouth. It was the first, not built, planted. And as she stood before it, her reflection didn't appear. Instead, Noah's did. Except it wasn't him. Not quite. This version of Noah was too still. His eyes didn't blink. His mouth opened slightly, just enough for a whisper to crawl out, "You're not Emma." Her stomach dropped. "What did you say?" she whispered. The reflection tilted its head. Emma closed the mouth. "You opened something else." She stepped back. Her body felt wrong, heavy. Noah called her name behind her. The mirror said it first. "Emma." She turned. Both voices overlapped. And then, the real Noah stumbled forward, caught her shoulders, pulled her back. The mirror shattered. Not from touch, from tension. It exploded inward, glass turning to dust before it hit the ground. And on the altar, where there had been nothing moments ago, sat a photograph. Emma picked it up slowly. It showed the well. Not as it was, as it had been. Surrounded by people. Children. And at the front, a girl with her back to the camera. A girl with her exact braid, her same coat. And beside her, an older woman, smiling, holding the girl's hand. Her face scratched out, but underneath, scrawled in red ink, "We made you to remember us." Emma looked up at Noah. "I don't think I ever left," she said softly. His eyes searched hers. "Left what?" She didn't blink. The mouth. Somewhere behind the church walls a bell began to groan. No chimes, just rusted breath, rising, calling. The bell rang only once, but it echoed through the town like it had been waiting years to speak. It didn't sound like metal. It sounded like memory. Old, aching, and unwilling to die. Emma stood frozen in the church, the photo clutched in one hand, her fingers trembling so hard the edges sliced her palm. Blood welled and smeared across the scratched out face in the image. The woman holding the girl's hand, Emma's hand, was still a void. No eyes, no mouth. But now she was something worse than unknown. She was familiar. Noah reached for her, but she pulled away without thinking. Not out of fear, out of instinct. Some part of her was beginning to understand that touch meant more than comfort here. It meant recognition. And if what was inside her was starting to change, she didn't want to risk being recognized as something else. The ground beneath the church groaned. Not from movement, but from what sounded like something shifting far below. A breath stirring after years of stillness. The pews vibrated. The mirror dust on the floor twisted into symbols. Unreadable, but somehow full of meaning. The kind that didn't need language to hurt. Emma took a step forward and nearly collapsed. Her vision blurred. Not from dizziness, but from overlay. She was seeing two places at once. The church, and something beneath it. Stone walls. Roots. Water slowly dripping into a basin shaped like a mouth. She blinked hard. It didn't go away. Noah was saying something. His voice was muffled, like he was underwater. His hands grabbed her shoulders, trying to pull her back from the altar. She didn't move. Her lips parted and a word formed. Not aloud, not yet. Just behind her teeth. She bit down hard on her tongue. The blood grounded her. For a second. But the other place was still there. A thin veil now separated her from wherever the mouth had been hiding. She had thought it silenced, closed. Maybe it had been, but only in the places they looked. This was deeper, older, and she wasn't the first to come close to it. That woman in the photo. The one with the face scratched out. She had stood here too. Spoken, maybe. Given something to the dark that was now trying to take its shape again. Emma turned to Noah. Her voice came back as a whisper. "I think I was made to be her." "What?" he said, confused. She was erased, and something had to carry what she left behind. He stared at her, face pale. "Emma, you're..." But he stopped, because the mirror was no longer shattered. It had reformed behind them, not as a whole, as a doorway. And someone stood on the other side. Another Emma, not her reflection, not mimicking, watching. And behind that Emma stood others, dozens. Some wore her face, Some were Noah's, some were neither, but all of them stared with the same eyes. Eyes that didn't blink, eyes that waited. "I think I've been here more than once," she whispered. Noah stepped in front of her. "This isn't you. This isn't real." But Emma was already moving toward the mirror, not drawn to it, challenging it. Her reflection didn't follow. It stayed still as she approached, until Emma was inches from the glass. Then it smiled, wide, too wide, and spoke in a voice that wasn't a voice at all, but the feeling of speaking you were born from what we left behind. A name without a speaker, a vessel without a choice. "Come home." Emma reached into her coat pocket. The key was still there, still warm, still humming. She pressed it to the mirror, and the glass shuddered, but didn't open. The other Emma, it tilted its head and whispered, "You're not the lock. You're the door." The key turned black. Ash fell apart in her hand. Behind her, Noah shouted something. She couldn't hear it. The mirror pulsed once, twice, and then it pulled her in. No sound, no scream, just absence. Noah lunged after her, too late. The mirror returned to stillness. His reflection stared back, but Emma's was gone. Inside the mirror, the world was pale and silent. The sky had no color. The ground had no shadow. Emma stood on a path made of broken frames, windows, mirrors, pictures, each step cracking another layer of memory, and on either side of the path, mouths lined the ground. Closed. Waiting. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew what she was looking for. The name, the first one. The one that wasn't a word, but a shape made of grief. And if she didn't find it first, something else would. Emma walked the path of broken glass, every step slicing soundlessly through the silence beneath her feet. She didn't bleed. The pain didn't come from the cuts. It came from the things reflected in the shards. Each one flickered with a version of herself she didn't remember being. A child standing over a well, eyes too wide, mouth open. A teenager curled in a corner, whispering into her own palms like she could cradle a voice and keep it secret. An older woman, her face drawn and unfamiliar, scratching symbols into wood with nails worn to the bone. This place, wherever it was, felt like a wound in time. Not a prison, not quite a world, but something in between. A graveyard for versions of herself that had never truly lived. As she moved forward, the sky above shifted, not with clouds but with shapes. Elongated shadows that drifted like regrets, watching her from a distance that never stayed constant. She called out once. Just once. "Noah." Her voice didn't echo. It sank, like a stone dropped into still water, vanishing without ripples. And somewhere behind her, one of the mouths on the path cracked open. Only a little, just enough to breathe. Emma didn't turn. She kept walking. Far behind her, Noah paced the church's broken floor, hands shaking, mirror dust clinging to his jacket like frost. Emma had vanished in front of him, sucked into the reflection like light into a black hole, and the mirror had gone dead. Not shattered, not active, just glass again. He punched it, but it didn't react. He shouted her name, kicked at the altar, screamed into the silence, but nothing gave. And then, as he sat slumped against the front pew, it happened. The recorder, the same one Emma had thrown into the woods. It was on the floor beside him, whole. Playing, his own voice, not recent, not old, a voice he'd never used before. "If you're here, you're already part of it. This place doesn't trap you, it remembers you. It keeps you as a possibility, as it could have been." He scrambled back, heart pounding. "You don't save her by breaking in. You save her by listening." The voice cut out. Noah looked at the mirror, and this time, it was a window. He could see her. Emma, walking alone across a barren place that reflected nothing. He pressed his hand to the glass, and it rippled. Inside, Emma stopped. The ground before her had changed, no longer mirrors. Now, just earth, cold, dark, freshly turned. Rows of it, stretching out like graves. And beside each mound stood a name, not a headstone, a whisper, etched into the air like fog shaped into letters. She recognized none of them, until she did. her name, twice. Once spelled as Emma Vale, and once again beneath it as the vessel. She knelt before the second one. The earth pulsed beneath her fingers. And then the mouth beneath the dirt opened. It didn't scream. It inhaled. All around her, the sky began to twist. The shapes above turned downward, descending slowly, stretching like dripping wax. They had no legs, no feet. Just faces, blurry and overlapping, hundreds of them, some with her eyes, some with her mother's voice, some with Noah's fear. One of them leaned close, spoke without sound. Emma understood anyway. You are not one girl, you are all of them. The failure, the survivor, the mistake, the echo. You didn't speak the name. You became it. The mouth beneath her fully opened. She fell in, not down, inward. She awoke in a room, familiar. Her bedroom. As a child. The wallpaper still torn at the edges. The light flickering from the hallway. Her journal on the nightstand. Open to a page she hadn't written yet. Footsteps echoed down the hall. She stood, heart racing, throat dry. The doorknob turned. Noah stepped in. But it wasn't him. His eyes were all wrong, flat and endless. And when he spoke, it wasn't his voice. We tried to leave you out of this. You wouldn't let us. You looked in. That's all it takes. She backed away. The room peeled. Like paint, like memory. Reality split down the middle. And there, behind the wall, was the real Emma. Bound, silent, watching. The version of her that hadn't spoken the name. The version that still remembered how to be whole. She reached through, touched fingers, and the world screamed. Noah saw the mirror explode from within. Emma landed at his feet, bleeding, gasping. Alive, her eyes flickered with something he didn't recognize. And she whispered, voice raw, it's not a name anymore. It's a memory that wears you. He knelt beside her. Did you bury it? She shook her head. No. I let it see the real me. And from the woods beyond the church, a second bell began to toll. A deeper one she had never heard before. One that wasn't calling them. It was warning them. Because someone else had spoken. And the mouth wasn't hungry anymore. It was awake. The second bell rang like the cracking of old bones. Low and stretched, as though time itself had slowed to listen. Emma clutched her chest as the sound rolled through her, not like thunder, but like memory seeping under the ribs. Noah stood frozen beside her, head tilted, face pale. They both heard it, but the sound meant something different to each of them. For Emma, it was recognition. For Noah, it was dread. Emma pushed herself to her feet. The mirror at her back was nothing now, just broken glass and slivered wood. A memory that had collapsed into itself. But beyond the ruined church walls, the trees had begun to shift. The woods that once stood still in breathless quiet now leaned inward again. Not with curiosity, with hunger. Someone else spoke it, she said aloud, though the words barely reached past her lips. Someone new. Noah turned toward the sound of the trees groaning. Or someone old. Someone who never stopped saying it. The thought settled like ash. The name, unspoken for so long, hidden in silence and memory, was no longer dormant. Someone had found it, not in books or dreams, but in their own bloodline. It had been passed like a disease. A memory carried through families, embedded in bedtime stories, nursery rhymes, or the twitch of lips in sleep. Emma had buried it inside herself, and now someone else had dug it out. They didn't speak much as they made their way back to the hollow's edge. The path was unfamiliar, not because they hadn't walked it before, but because it had changed while they were inside. The trees were older, the sky was lower, and every bird they passed had no eyes, only blank spaces where sight used to be. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the photograph, the one with her face scratched out, not because she feared her, but because she was starting to believe she'd become her, not in the literal sense. In the inevitable one, a girl carries a memory. The memory changes her. She tries to bury it, and in doing so, becomes the next vessel. Over and over again. And now, someone else was next. The house that waited at the edge of the hollow wasn't familiar. Yet Emma knew exactly which step creaked before she placed her foot on it. The porch sagged as if bracing for her arrival. Noah reached for the door handle, but it was already open, not ajar, not left unlocked. It had been waiting. Inside, the air smelled like burnt cloth and rotting pages. The wallpaper was curling in perfect patterns, like symbols drawn in reverse. The furniture was wrong, tables too short, chairs too wide, nothing quite fitting human form. And across the living room, in a high-backed chair facing the wall, sat someone, not moving, not breathing, but present. Emma stepped forward. "Who are you?" The figure didn't turn. It just spoke. A child's voice, warped with age. I said it twice, once for me, once for her. Noah's voice cracked. Her. The figure stood, slowly, arms too long, neck bent, as if it had forgotten how to hold a head upright. And when it turned, they saw the face, stitched from pieces of others. Lips that didn't match the jawline, eyes set too far apart, hair only in patches, like it had been glued back on by memory alone. Emma didn't scream, because she recognized her own eyes in that face, but not both, just one. The figure smiled. The first time I said it, she tried to save me. The second time, she joined me. Emma stepped closer. Who was she? The smile faded. Your mother. The words hit harder than they should have. Emma had no memory of her mother past the age of 7. Just sense. A lullaby. The feeling of soft fingers brushing through her hair. She didn't leave, Emma whispered. She was taken. The thing nodded, by her own voice. The figure reached into its coat and pulled out a cracked mirror shard. Not polished. Clouded, like it had soaked in something unclean. It held the shard out. Emma took it without hesitation. Inside the reflection, her mother's face, young, afraid, mouthing a word. The word. Emma shut her eyes, gripping the mirror until her palm bled. Why show me this now? The thing, herself, her ancestor, her echo, shrugged. Because the mouth listens for repetition, not volume, she whispered. You whispered. The next one is screaming. Noah stepped back, breath caught. Who's the next? The figure didn't answer. It dissolved, like it had only existed for the length of that question. Back outside, the sky had turned red, not from sunset, from warning. Emma turned to Noah. We need to find who said it, before it finishes taking them. He nodded, jaw set. And if it already has, Emma didn't hesitate. Then we make sure it doesn't say it a third time. She held up the mirror shard, not as a weapon, as proof. That silence wasn't safety anymore, and that the name, once buried, was now alive. The red sky didn't fade with time, it thickened. Clouds moved like bruises across the heavens, churning slowly above the tree line as Emma and Noah left the porch behind. The house disappeared the moment they turned their backs. Not gradually. It simply wasn't there anymore, like it had been a stage built only for one performance. And now the scene had changed. Emma gripped the mirror shard tightly, her blood drying along the edges where it had cut her. Every so often, the reflection inside shifted, not mirroring the present, but showing fragments of things yet to come. A hallway with no walls. A mouth stretched across an entire ceiling. A girl, no older than 10, sitting cross-legged on a rotted floor, whispering to herself. That image stayed the longest. Emma saw the girl's lips moving, over and over, forming a word she couldn't quite hear. Noah glanced over and caught a glimpse. Is that? Emma nodded. I think she's the one. He didn't ask how she knew. He could feel it too. That slow pressure building in the air, as if something had cracked open beneath their feet and hadn't stopped leaking since. The mouth didn't just want to be heard. It wanted to be understood. And a child, with no memory of fear or history, was the perfect listener. They didn't go to the authorities. What would they say? That a girl was speaking a name that could tear open reality. That somewhere in the woods a voice, shaped God, was unfolding itself like a map written in blood and trauma. No, they went to the school. It was quiet, deserted. Summer break had left the halls hollow. And the fluorescent lights flickered with the same broken rhythm. Emma, remembered from her own childhood. She hadn't stepped inside since she was 12, the last time she had spoken in class. The last time she remembered feeling like herself. They found her in the music room. The girl, alone, hunched over the piano though her fingers never touched the keys. She was mouthing something to the space between the notes, whispering into the vibrations. Emma felt the hair rise along her arms before the girl even turned. When she did, Emma stopped breathing. The girl looked like her, not just vaguely. Exactly. Same eyes, same jaw, same uneven freckles across the left cheek, and when she smiled, it was Emma's smile. Noah stepped forward. "What's your name?" The girl tilted her head. "Do you need me to have one?" That voice, it wasn't a child's. It was every voice they'd ever heard through the mouth, layered into a single note that hummed through the linoleum floor. Emma crouched down, forcing her hands to stay steady. "I've seen you," she said. "In the mirror." The girl grinned wider. "You see what you leave behind. Did you say the name?" The girl shrugged. "You said it first. I just remembered it better." Emma's mouth went dry. It was happening again. The memory wasn't being passed. It was being rehearsed. Each repetition wore a new face, but the script stayed the same. One whisper, then two. The third was always the moment it woke. Noah circled around the room, looking for anything out of place. His eyes locked on the mirror above the piano. Small, smudged, but intact. Its surface rippled gently, even with no one looking into it. "I don't want to hurt you," Emma said softly. The girl blinked. "But I'm not real? You made me? You made all of this?" "No," Emma said. "It made me." Silence. Then, for the first time, the girl frowned. "That's not true." Emma rose. "It is. I've been living with someone else's voice inside me for years. It fed on what I didn't say. What I couldn't say. But you," she pointed. "You're not a vessel. You're a copy." Noah shouted suddenly. "Emma, behind you!" The mirror above the piano shattered outward, not into shards, into mouths. Dozens of them, all lipless, all gnashing, all speaking. But not aloud, inside their minds, the same name. Over and over. Burning behind the eyes. Emma screamed, not from fear, but from the searing heat that suddenly bloomed in her chest. The mirror shard in her hand began to hum again, the reflection turning black. She raised it and stared into the void, forcing herself to see. And what stared back wasn't the girl. It was the thing that had been waiting beneath her name all along. Something ancient. Something personal. Not a god, not a demon. Just memory given form. Grief twisted into a shape that wanted company. She turned to the girl, the copy. "Why me?" Emma demanded. "Why all of this?" The girl's mouth opened wider than humanly possible. And the answer came not from her lips, but from everywhere. "Because you were the first to listen. And now, you're the only one who can make them forget." Noah grabbed Emma's hand. "What does that mean?" Emma didn't answer, because she knew. If she spoke the name again, one last time, not aloud, but in the right place, she could pull the memory back into herself, bury it, not in silence, but in something stronger, finality. She looked down at the mirror shard. It had begun to crack. She looked at the girl, still smiling, and she nodded, then whispered the name, for the third and last time. The room exploded with silence. The mouths turned to ash. The girl vanished like mist at dawn, and the mirror, the last one, imploded inward. Emma collapsed. Noah caught her before she hit the floor. Her pulse was faint, but there, and the name was gone. Truly gone, not forgotten, just no longer needed, just a memory. Dead, for the first time in what felt like years. The quiet wasn't watching them. It wasn't waiting. It just was. Emma lay in Noah's arms, breathing shallow, her body limp, but her face at peace. The mirror shard, now nothing but dust between her fingers, had taken the last of the name with it. Not hidden, not buried. Destroyed. Noah didn't speak for a long time. He held her like he was afraid the weight of the world might come crashing down if he let go. The music room was still. No mouths, no humming, no voices behind the walls. just sunlight filtering through a cracked window, painting lines across the floor. The piano stood silent, untouched, no longer a conduit. Whatever presence had lived here, whatever memory had worn Emma's face, had vanished with the name's last breath. Eventually, she stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then she saw him, and a soft, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "It's gone," she whispered. Her voice was raw, like she'd been speaking in her sleep for weeks. Noma nodded. "You said it." Emma nodded too. "Not out of fear. Not to call it. I said it to end it." They sat there together in the sunlight, surrounded by silence that no longer pressed against the walls. Emma closed her eyes again, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion. It was relief. Her shoulders slumped, like she had been carrying someone else's weight her entire life. And now, for the first time, it was hers alone. Not something inherited. Not something implanted by a name that wanted to survive through her, just hers. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze. Outside, the sky turned a calm gray blue, not ominous, just overcast. The kind of sky that promised rain but not ruin. The town, quiet for weeks, slowly resumed its rhythm. Birds returned to the wires, the air softened, and no one, not one person, remembered the girl who had been whispering at the piano. Not the principal, not the janitor, not even the townspaper, which carried no mention of what had taken place. Emma and Noah walked the streets together, and everything looked smaller, less haunted. Like something had stepped away, no longer interested in what remained. They passed the clearing in the woods, now overgrown. The well had collapsed completely, buried beneath roots and rock. They passed the tower, its doors permanently sealed with chains and rust. And they passed the broken church, now truly empty. No echoes, no bells. Only one thing hadn't changed: the reflection. In the motel bathroom, when Emma washed her hands and looked up, she expected to see herself. She did. But something about her reflection still felt off. Not dangerous, just older. She stared at it for a long time, letting the faucet run until the water turned cold. And finally she asked aloud, "Do you still remember?" Her reflection didn't smile. It just looked back, eyes wide, tired but unflinching. She nodded to herself. "Good, then we're even." That night, Noah lit a fire behind the motel, not a ceremonial one, just a fire. They sat by it with the journal between them. His old one, tattered and blood-stained, but no longer full of dread. They read a few pages together, laughed at how scared they'd once been of things they couldn't name. Emma tore out the last page, the one where the name had been scribbled in a shaky hand, and tossed it into the flames. It caught quickly, burned clean. Ash spiraled into the dark. Noah leaned back on his elbows. "You think it'll ever come back?" Emma didn't answer right away. She watched the smoke curl into shapes she didn't try to understand. "I think names don't die. They just forget why they mattered." He nodded. They didn't need more than that. In the days that followed, the town adjusted. People smiled more. They remembered less. And that was a gift, not a curse. The weight of what had happened, of who had carried what pain, slowly faded into the space between conversations. Noah packed his bags a week later. He didn't say where he was going. He didn't have to. He promised to write, and Emma believed him. She stayed. Not out of duty. Not out of fear that something might return. She stayed because, for the first time in her life, the quiet felt like hers. And the mirror in her room only showed one person now. Not an echo, not a warning, just Emma, alone, whole, and finally, mercifully, free. It rained the morning Emma buried the last piece of it. A steady drizzle, soft as breath. Barely enough to soak the grass, but heavy enough to hide the sound of her shoveling. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Not that anyone would have understood. Even Noah, who had seen and survived it all with her, wouldn't have asked her to do this. But some burdens needed to be buried in private, like secrets whispered too many times to ever feel like secrets again. The hill, where she stood, overlooked the hollow. From there, you could just barely make out where the woods used to thicken, where the tower had leaned into the sky like a crooked finger pointing to nowhere. It had all returned to earth now. Grass grew where the well once opened. Trees closed ranks where the house without doors had waited. No paths, no marks. No signs that anything unnatural had ever breathed there. But Emma remembered. In her pocket, she carried the last artifact. A pendant she hadn't noticed until the day after Noah left. It had fallen between the boards beneath her motel bed. A simple oval locket, blackened with age. No chain, no inscription. Inside, when she finally dared to open it, she found a scrap of fabric and a single drop of dried blood pressed into the lining like a seed. She didn't know whose it was or why it called to her the way it did, but when she held it in her hand, the sky darkened slightly. Not a threat, a reminder. So she brought it here. Emma dug the hole slowly. The ground was soft but stubborn. With each scoop, her arms shook more, not from effort, but from memory. As the shovel scraped the last of the soil free, she thought back to the girl in the music room, her mirror smile, her voice that hadn't been her own. That girl had spoken the name with the kind of intimacy that couldn't be taught. And Emma had seen something in her face that haunted her more than any horror. Recognition. She'd seen herself. Not like a twin. Not like a warning. Like a version of her that hadn't been lucky enough to survive. That's what the name did. It found the edges of a person, the cracks, and whispered between them. Until the person wasn't a person anymore. Just a shape held together by memory. Emma lowered the locket into the ground. Covered it gently. Didn't mark the spot. Didn't say anything over it. Some things needed no ceremony, only stillness. The rain picked up as she walked back to town. Each drop seemed to erase a little more of the world behind her. By the time she reached the main road, the hill and the hollow had faded into mist. Like they were never there. Like they had been nothing more than a place her mind wandered when the world got too loud. But she knew better. She stopped by the diner on the edge of town. The same one she used to skip school to sit in for hours with her journal, sipping burnt coffee and pretending the world outside wasn't unraveling. Now it was just a diner again. Bright booths, smiling waitresses. Ordinary noise. She sat in the corner, ordered the pie, and listened to the low murmur of lives untouched by horror. That was the gift of forgetting. They didn't know what they'd been saved from, and Emma wouldn't tell them. Because survival wasn't something she needed credit for. It was something she needed to live. Days passed, then weeks. Noah sent a postcard from the coast. "Water's quieter here," he'd written, "not as deep." She smiled when she read it, tucked it into the mirror frame above her dresser, and didn't reply. Some friendships didn't need constant tending. Some were carved deep enough to last without words. The dreams came less often. The girl in the mirror stopped visiting. The mouse that used to breathe behind closed doors stayed gone. But sometimes, when the wind picked up, Emma would hear the faintest sound beneath it all, something like the memory of a whisper. Not the name. Not anymore. Just the sound of it leaving. One night, months later, she stood outside beneath a sky so wide it made her feel small in a way that comforted her. She looked up at the stars, felt the cool grass beneath her bare feet, and realized that the fear had finally receded, not erased, not forgotten, just quiet. She didn't think of the name anymore. She thought of the silence she'd earned, the weight she'd carried, and the simple, sacred fact that she had chosen not to pass it on. That was the real ending. Not the burning, not the screaming, not even the remembering, but refusal. Emma Vale chose to be the last echo, the one who didn't speak, the one who turned the mouth into stone. And for the first time in a very long time, the world stayed still. No eyes behind the glass, no breath beneath the floor, no name waiting to be said, just silence. And this time, it meant peace.